Hey guys, tonight we slip into a pale London fog that tastes faintly of coal dust and cheap gin. A haze so thick you can almost reach out and scoop it with your fingers. You shuffle along greasy cobblestones, boots tapping whetstone while lamplight flickers above like sleepy fireflies. On every side, silhouettes lean from doorways, parasols folded tight, their whispers offering more than the night air. You probably won't survive this stroll without a little scandal clinging to your coat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you are listening from and what time the clock is striking for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your steps carry you past the grimy facade of a pawn shop, its window crammed with tarnished trinkets, a silent roll call of desperate exchanges. Somewhere deeper in the alley, a whistle trills twice, the coded signal that a client has been found or a constable has turned the corner, depending on how your luck runs. The city officially records nearly 8,600 fallen women in 1851, a statistic quoted in sober parliamentary papers, yet historians still argue whether the true number was double or only half. Hidden behind respectable curtains, you pause under a lamp to read a chalked message someone has scribbled. Good time, 2 pennies, no questions. A marketing plan as blunt as those sandwich board advertisements hawking cough syrup. The fog wraps you like a damp blanket that forgot how to be warm. A sudden gust scuttles newspapers along the gutter, and you spot a sensational headline shrieking, "Virtue in ruin." A mainstream fact lurks beneath the melodrama. In 1839, the Metropolitan Police Act allowed plainclothes officers to patrol these very lanes, hoping to curb vice but often settling, instead, for small bribes and a free wink. One officer laughs nearby, pocketing a coin while pretending to adjust his collar. The joke practically writes itself, though it comes taxi-free. You breathe in odours of roasted chestnuts mingled with sewage. Victorian London rarely offered neutral aromas, and make a mental note that chillier-scented candles might be preferable bedroom decor. A slim figure in a frayed shawl approaches and offers a smile with more gaps than pearls. She jokes that her office hours are longer than a factory's, which, considering some mills ran 18-hour shifts, is both tragic and wry. You try not to trip over a loose cobble. The stone leaps up like it wants a turn at slapstick comedy. Remember, you came here for history, but the street gives you vaudeville too. Beyond a corner, a crooked sign reads, "Coffee House," though the beverage inside is half chicory and half mystery. You duck in, fingers tingling from cold, and a wave of heat fogs your spectacles. The clientele is mostly women with threadbare gloves, clutching porcelain cups as though the white glaze grants immunity from reality. One complains that her patent leather boots squeak louder than the church bell, drawing unwanted attention. Another boasts that she powdered her skin with a special blend of rice starch and lead to achieve a fashionable pallor. Quirky, yes, and also gradually poisonous. It is the Victorian equivalent of trading tomorrow's health for tonight's Instagram filter. A trio of sailors lumbers through the door, smelling of brine and optimism, and suddenly every conversation tilts in their direction like iron filings toward a magnet. Coins clink. An older woman pretends to sneeze when a coin rolls too near her foot, scooping it up with a wink that could punch holes in a battleship hull. You note the easy choreography of practice survival. Glances exchanged, chairs slid, hands offered, deals sealed in whispers. It is a ballet no opera house stages, yet its dancers rehearse nightly in worn-out shoes. As you exit, drizzle kisses your cheeks, gaslights sputter overhead, and the glass panels are so sooty you could sketch cartoons in the residue. Speaking of cartoons, Victorian satirists love to draw venal Venus figures foiling sober gentlemen, a joke that sold papers faster than warm crumpets. Tonight you catch a glimpse of that humour living and breathing. A portly banker tips his top hat, slips on gutter slime, and lands on a cabbage leaf, once destined for someone's dinner. Even the cab horse snorts at the slapstick. You are reminded to step carefully. History has no sympathy for ruined trousers. You pass an ornate iron fountain, gifted by a philanthropist who swore clean water would keep the poor from strong drink. The basin now hosts 3 floating lemons, 2 wilted roses, and a pair of silk stockings, whose owner presumably made a speedy getaway. The philanthropist's hope, noble. The outcome, comic. Your second joke of the evening writes itself, and you chuckle while dodging another puddle. Further on, you approach a cramped lodging house advertising beds by the hour. The matron at the door has an accounts ledger longer than a Dickens novel, each entry recording pennies earned and soles worn thin. She claims, with a grin sharper than bargain cutlery, that Queen Victoria herself once passed by in disguise to see the trade for her own eyes. Quirky rumour? Certainly. Fringe history? Absolutely. Verifiable? Historians still argue whether the anecdote sprang from political satire or an overactive imagination fed by gin. For a final sensory flourish, inhale the mingled scents of wet wool, burning tallow, and distant lavender cologne. They merge into a perfume uniquely Victorian, equal parts elegance and exhaust pipe. You close your coat, noting how the brass button is as cold as a creditor's heart. A stray cat darts between barrels, intent on its own midnight commerce, perhaps swapping fleas for fish bones, reminding you that every creature in this labyrinth is bargaining for tomorrow. A quick recap would spoil the mood, so instead you press onward, mindful that the next corner could reveal anything from a vicar's sermon to a gambler's grin. For now, keep that lantern high, mind your pockets, and let curiosity light the rest of the path. You push through a narrow tradesman's entrance, the door creaking like it resents your curiosity, and step into a scullery so cramped that even the spiders have organized a queue. Steam hangs low as pots bubble with yesterday's stew, and coal dust settles on everything that dares to stay still for longer than a sigh. You wipe a circle on a cracked window, looking for daylight, but the pane only shows brick walls and the backs of other houses. Domestic service, for thousands of young women in Victorian England, is advertised as honest work, yet the honesty cuts both ways. The hours begin before sunrise, finish after midnight, and wages can vanish with a single frown from Madame. Contemporary household manuals list a maid of Newark's yearly pay at £8 to £14, which sounds generous until you realise she must purchase her own uniforms, soap, and the occasional doctor when chilblains blossom like crimson gooseberries on her hands. You lift a dented kettle, pour water onto stone, and watch it hiss as if scolding you. A cook barks that the master prefers coffee ground precisely 7 minutes, not 6, because anything less insults the bean's dignity. You note the absurd precision and stash it away for your diary of nonsense rules. Even so, breaking one of these customs often leads to sudden dismissal. Without a good reference letter written in loops of blue ink, a servant might find every respectable door closed, which is rather like being locked out of an entire city. Joke 1 arrives when the butler compares references to modern customer ratings, giving poor Jane only 2 stars because her curtsy squeaks. You imagine her pleading with invisible Yelp reviewers by the coal bunker. Your attention drifts to a narrow staircase, 2 feet wide and 10 eternities tall, leading to attic rooms where maids sleep 3 to a bed. Each mattress is stuffed with straw so lively it occasionally pokes through and stages a mutiny. At the top you find a young woman sewing a torn petticoat by candle stub. She tells you in a whisper that she has not seen her village since last harvest. Her family writes letters she cannot afford to post. She laughs that the candle is her most demanding roommate, always burning rent money at both ends. Historians still argue whether domestic service truly offered upward mobility or merely delayed descent into poverty. But for her, the debate feels academic while she counts pennies under her pillow. 2 floors down, the lady of the house rings for a footman, but her bell string breaks. She blames the nearest maid who, unfortunately, is carrying a tray of china worth more than her annual salary. One teacup chips and rolls like a startled beetle across the floor. The mistress gasps, the butler sighs, and within an hour, the girl is handed her wages in a limp envelope, minus the cost of that teacup. She walks out the tradesman's door with nowhere to sleep and only 3 shillings for comfort. Dismissal can pivot on such fragile moments, and the gutter waits with patient arms. You step into the drizzle alongside her, boots sending ripples through murky puddles. She scans the street for lodgings that charge by the night, though even a penny doss house demands payment up front. One advertisement promises a landlady of kindness, which, translated, means 3 straw-filled hammocks in a windowless cellar. Another offers lodging if the occupant agrees to sweep the corridor, scrub the privy, and fetch cold shawls that blur suspiciously into unpaid labor. Joke 2 lands when you realize every room for rent comes with more job descriptions than a modern startup. Late afternoon grows colder, so she joins a queue at the back entrance of a public kitchen run by a charitable society. The soup is barley and water, the bread a shade paler than gravel, yet volunteers insist it nourishes the spirit. Here she meets others who once polished mahogany banisters, trimmed wicks, ironed collars, and now navigate a different economy. Some barter leftover uniform buttons for food. One sells her hair, prized by wig makers for its length and luster, walking out lighter and 1 shilling richer. A particularly quirky tidbit drifts your way. Certain wig makers pay extra for hair washed in lavender water, prompting pragmatic girls to dunk their locks in diluted perfume scavenged from scrap barrels behind chemist shops. Dusk slides in like ink over parchment. Street lamps pop with ignition, their orange halos trembling. Under a railway arch, informal hiring markets spring up. Women gather, skirts pinned high to dodge puddles, hoping for daily cleaning work. Employers drift past inspecting teeth and posture as if choosing horses. Your new companion accepts an afternoon of washing floors for 3pence, but when she finishes, the matron claims she worked too slowly and pays only 1. Faced with hunger's arithmetic, she wanders to Commercial Street where, rumor says, men pay without needing a reference letter or speed test. She leans against a lamppost, fingers trembling, and copies the stance of others who tilt their heads at flattering angles. You notice how they adjust shawls to reveal just enough ankle, the era's daring advertisement. A constable saunters by whistling a hymn strangely at odds with his wink. He warns her that new contagious diseases inspectors prowl tonight. They can haul any woman to a hospital for examination, guilty or not. She nods, says she will take her chances, and thanks him with a smile that costs nothing but might buy 5 minutes of safety. Rain begins in earnest. Each drop a tiny hammer on cobbles. In the shelter of a doorway, she negotiates her first client. The man, smelling of printer's ink, mutters about deadlines and offers a silver 6pence. She accepts, perhaps surprised she can still drive a bargain. Joke 3 pops when the printer admits he once proofread sermons condemning vice. He confesses he preferred them for their dramatic punctuation. After the exchange, she pockets the coin, straightens her shawl, and discovers a peculiar resilience. You read in her posture a silent calculation. 1 coin feeds her tonight, 2 rent a bed, 3 build a small cushion against tomorrow's storms. Before you leave her, you glance at posters plastered on a brick wall. One warns servants against sinful temptations. Another advertises a magic elixir promising fortune to virtuous girls. The contrast is almost theatrical. A mainstream fact lurks under the hype. Domestic servants constituted the largest single occupational group of women in mid-19th century Britain, roughly 1 in 3 working women by 1870. Yet a single misstep pushed many toward precarious trades. A train whistles overhead, rattling bolts loose from the arch. You breathe coal smoke and smell burnt sugar from a nearby factory. The night pulls its velvet hood tight, and you step back, leaving her to navigate choices as sharp as fish knives. The scullery kettle, the attic straw, the lamplight corner, they form a triangle on every working girl's map. You head for the next street, boots tapping out a new rhythm, mindful that behind every respectable doorway springs a story just as fragile. Midnight's chill presses at your collar as coloured gaslights beckon from an elaborately frosted doorway advertising all-you-night refreshment. Inside, a tidal wave of warmth, cinnamon smoke, and laughter swallows you whole. Mirrors line every wall, tripling the crowd until it seems the entire parish is elbowing for space. Velvet drapes sag beneath gilt cornices, reflecting ruby glass chandeliers that throw glimmers across cutty crystal decanters. A pianist beats ragtime on an out-tune upright, never letting the tempo falter even when two patrons argue in soprano and bass about who owns the last stool. You sidle to the mahogany counter. The bartender polishes a glass with theatrical twirls, announcing that his latest recipe, Lark Ascending, contains gin, sugar, and an optimistic squeeze of lemon. Joke one flutters when he claims the drink also improves posture, complexion, and marital harmony if taken in heroic doses. You raise an eyebrow while coins clink, and suddenly you hold a tumbler shimmering like liquid moonlight. The first sip stings with juniper needles, then settles into syrupy courage. During the 1832nd Parliament's Beerhouse Act relaxed licensing laws so dramatically that gin palaces bloomed on every main road, their ornate facades challenging even church spires for attention. Well-dressed clerks rub shoulders here with costermongers whose barrows still smell of fish. In one mirrored corner, a woman adjusts ostrich feathers on her bonnet, each plume bobbing like a nervous canary. She works the room with precise eye contact, presenting a smile bright enough to make rent and supper in a single evening. You drift nearer a marbly-topped table where a parliamentarian's aide wagers a guinea on a card game called Spoil 5, though the only thing getting spoiled is his dignity when he misreads a trump. Joke two lambs as the loser vows to introduce a bill against trick candles. After noticing his gin keeps topping itself up mysteriously, the bartender winks at you. Every third drink here is artful sleight of hand. A refill conveyed while patrons stare at their own reflections trying to decide whether they look prosperous or merely flushed. Near the back, thin blue glass panels glow eerily above the spirit racks. A quirky tidbit. Proprietors discovered that bluer-tinted lamps masked the cloudiness of cheap gin, convincing customers they sip to smooth the spirit. The practice survived long enough that entire streets once glimmered azure at closing time, as if the Thames had learned how to hover indoors. Across the bar, two factory girls fresh off a 16-hour shift toast their good fortune at finding a perch on the brass-railed footrest, the Victorian equivalent of VIP seating. One confides that she sold her canteen cheese ration to afford tonight's adventure, laughing that cheese goes straight to hips, but gin goes straight to legend. A top-hatted constable strolls through, tipping his helmet to the bartender who, in exchange, places a discreet tumbler of Mother's Ruin behind a pewter tea urn. Officially, lawmen frequent gin palaces to ensure order. Unofficially, they sample the wares to understand the evidence. Historians still argue whether constabulary presence tempered drunken violence or merely legitimized it by standing polite guard. You watch the officer chat with patrons about cricket scores, while ignoring a dice game under his very elbow. A shrill bell rings at the doorway. Not closing time, but the arrival of a street preacher hauling pamphlets promising temperance and eternal bliss in equal measure. He climbs a milk crate and begins railing against the demon juniper. A barmaid flicks sawdust at his boots, muttering that eternal bliss can queue outside with the milk deliveries. Even the pianist punctuates the sermon with off-key flourishes, turning holy wrath into background harmony. The preacher retreats before finishing his third warning, leaving you to wonder which sin stings more, gin or public mockery. At a side alcove stands a notice board for discreet opportunities. Here, Gentlemen scribble appointments in shorthand no stenographer can decode. A quiet conversation unfolds between a railway engineer and a young man offering silk stockings at wholesale prices. Real silk if you overlook the cotton admixture. Deals swirl like cigarette smoke, never settling. You overhear someone negotiating space on a departing emigrant ship. A pregnant pause follows when the buyer realizes the ticket offers no berth, only deck passage beside crates of live chickens. He decides he will think on it after another drink. Joke 3 arrives when the bartender remarks that chickens are less troublesome than in-laws, yet still lay breakfast. With senses humming, you push past swinging glass doors into a narrow corridor leading to private snugs. Tiny rooms with red plush seats and bells for service. Inside one snug, a faded actress rehearses lines under her breath, planning a comeback at a music hall across town. She sips gin mixed with violet syrup, claiming the floral note soothes her stage fright. A scholar at the next table argues with himself about proper Greek accents, while sketching new pub lighting schemes on a napkin. He insists that reflections in convex mirrors influence literary creativity, though nobody asked the mirrors. A mainstream fact surfaces in conversation when a clerk remarks that by 1869, the Licensing Act tightened regulations, forcing many gin palaces to install shutters by midnight or face steep fines. Nevertheless, clandestine backdoor sales continued, proving that legislation slows thirst about as effectively as lace curtains stop a hurricane. You weave back toward the main bar, where the pianist finishes his set with a flourish that sends revelers cheering. Coins rain into a chipped bowler hat, clinking like a tiny thunderstorm. Someone strikes a match and sets off a Chinese cracker, its pop echoing through the mirrors, startling a pair of carriage horses waiting outside. For a heartbeat the room holds its breath. Then conversation resumes, louder, livelier, as if the cracker banished the last sliver of restraint. A sudden draft sighs through the entrance, curling candle flames. You feel cool air brush your neck, mixed with the hint of baker's yeast from a 24-hour pie stall across the street. Hunger tugs, reminding you that gin flows easier on a full stomach. Patrons begin placing orders for oyster loaves and eel pies delivered by fleet-footed boys. You watch one lad dart through crowded tables with a tray balanced like a halo, never spilling a droplet. Living proof that London apprentices develop circus reflexes or perish in puddles of gravy. As you finish your glass, the pianist lights a fresh cheroot and starts humming a new melody, promising another set that could last until dawn. Finger paints pale streaks across the sky. The mirror shows your reflection, cheeks ruddy, eyes half-lidded. The moment feels liquid, shapeable, balanced between delight and danger. Craving fresh air and a clearer head, you step outside. Street lamps hiss, and the wet pavement shivers with the mirrored glow of the palace behind you. You tuck collar to chin, inhaling city mist laced with juniper memory, and prepare to meet whatever surprises linger in the next alley's flickering gloom. Dawn stains the sky, a bruised lilac as you linger by riveted iron gates that guard St. Olave's Union Workhouse. Frost crusts the cobbles, brittling each breath. A bell clangs 6 times, its echo chasing sparrows from rooftop chimneys, and the porter unlatches a side door labeled casual ward. Out shuffle the night's guests, women swaddled in borrowed shawls that still smell of disinfectant and damp straw. Their eyes blink like owls meeting daylight too soon. No one speaks until they clear the gate, as if silence belonged to the institution and speech costs extra once you exit. Inside, only hours earlier, the same women lay head to toe on wooden platforms, a single grey blanket apiece. Their entry fee was labour, £3 of oakum picked from terry ropes, a task so monotonous, some inmates claimed it taught a higher level of meditation. Joke 1 lands when a girl named Ellen insists oakum picking is cheaper than any modern yoga retreat, though it does leave you with thumbs that look dipped in treacle. A mainstream datum. By 1864, the Casual Poor Act required every poor law union in England to provide overnight wards like this, offering shelter to the wandering poor while supposedly discouraging repeat visits through drudgery. You picture last night's supper, a portion of suet pudding floating in thin onion broth. The cook boasted it stuck to ribs, that Ellen whispered it mostly stuck to memories you want deleted. Historians still argue whether such meagre fare was intended as deterrent or simply reflected penny-you-pinching budgets, yet either way it drives many to gamble on street freedom rather than second helpings. A matron's voice once echoed along stone corridors, her keys clattering like a jealous tambourine. She inspected pockets for contraband, confiscating matches, letters, and the occasional tin whistle. Contraband often reappears in mysterious ways. Ellen says if you befriend the night soil man, he can smuggle anything inside a shovel of ashes. Quirky tidbit. Some wards allowed inmates to keep tame sparrows to control flies during summer, leading to impromptu bird markets in the laundry yard at dawn. Now, outside the gates, you watch thin shoulders straighten. Each woman draws a long breath of crisp air spiced with coal smoke and bakery yeast from a nearby stall. Freedom, even morning cold freedom, lifts posture like an invisible corset. Pockets contain only the halfpenny ticket issued on entry, redeemable for a chunk of bread in the parish kitchen. Few bother. Pawn shops trade those tickets for buttons or bent nails, used as fishhook weights along the Thames. Joke too flutters when Agnes quips that bent nails have a higher resale value than institutional charity. You walk with them toward Tooley Street, boots clacking a rhythm that quickens as the sun tints window panes rose. At a crossroads, they split into pairs. Some head for the wharf to cajole stevedores flush with pay, others for the back of Burlington Arcade where footmen linger before duties. Ellen tugs your sleeve and steers toward a ragawang yard. She exchanges a broken comb and 2 brass curtain rings scavenged from the ward for a penny and a wink from the dealer, who jokes that he accepts tears as down payment but only if bottled. She pockets the coin and outlines her plan. 1 penny buys a mug of hot coffee laced with chicory, and the warmth loosens lips of potential clients better than any painted smile. You note how experience seeds strategy even on the first free morning. Beneath her collar a blue bruise blooms, souvenir of a bed platform edge. She tucks it away with practiced indifference. A constable looms at the corner, moustache wax glistening in new light. He scans faces, tallying vagrants like a shopkeeper counts stock. Ellen greets him with a chipper. "Good morrow, constable," her accent slipping into refined imitation. Startled, he tips his helmet, perhaps convinced she is a governess, late for lessons, rather than a ward escapee. Behind you, another woman stifles laughter, calling it theatre worth the price of entry. Joke 3 arrives when she promises to teach elocution classes behind the coal chute, at 2pence per lesson, guarantee of social assent not included. Turning into a laneway, you pass a poster for a public lecture titled Urgent Reforms of the Poor Law. One speaker claims casual wards create cycles of dependency. Another labels them inhumane holding pens. The debate roars across broadsheets. Yet on these stones, Ellen and her companions only measure hours until hunger growls again. She confides that some purposely overstayed in the ward during severe winters, trading liberty for a guaranteed blanket. Historians still argue whether such calculated returns prove the system's necessity or its cruelty. A handcart rattles by, piled with day-old bread loaves, sold at quarter price. Ellen eyes them but saves her coin. She knows a lodging house near Mint Street that offers a seat on its rope bed for 2 pennies after dark. If luck smiles, today will yield the second coin. Rope beds, you learn, involve a thick hemp line strung wall to wall. Lodgers lean over it like laundries hung out to dry, sleeping half upright until dawn, when the keeper cuts the rope with a quick slash, tumbling everyone awake in a heap. She laughs that it beats the workhouse's bug census, though not by many legs. Chickens squawk behind crates at Borough Market as vendors set up stalls of oysters and eels. Ellen hums a sailor's shanty and tells you seagulls here develop refined taste. stealing only the plumpest winkles from open barrels. A fishmonger swears at the birds, then tips his hat to her. In a city this crowded alliances form across surprising professions. She buys nothing, only notes which sailor glances twice, which clerk fumbles his notebook. Each glance is potential income, each fumble a negotiation. By mid-morning, sun rays slice between warehouse roofs, painting golden ladders in drifting dust. Ellen pauses under one beam, warming her face like a cat on a windowsill. She declares that light is the only commodity without a toll in London, though dusk will charge interest later. She flips her coin, catches tails, and grins at the omen. You realize she has already mapped alternate endings to this day. A paid luncheon in a tavern snug, a ropey bed crash landing, or, if prospects sour, sleuthing another workhouse door before curfew. A church bell tolls, claiming 11 o'clock. Vendors shout prices, children chase hopes, and an organ grinder tests notes that wheeze like bellows kissing a mouse. You step aside as two washerwomen lug tin pails, gossiping about a new workhouse rule limiting inmates to 4 matches a week, apparently to curb secret smoking. Their outrage steams like the laundry water sloshing over their boots. Curiously, that same rule spurred a black market, where match heads get scraped into paper rolls sold as instant firelighters. Quirky commerce breeds wherever regulation blooms. Ellen tucks a stray curl beneath her bonnet, preparing to approach a mail clerk fumbling parcels near London Bridge. Her stride lengthens, shoulders back, chin lifted into manufactured optimism. You observe technique sharpen in real time, a survival craft equal to any guild trade. She merges with foot traffic, vanishing amid brown coats and billowing skirts, leaving you beside a sugar barrel leaking sweet crystals onto the pavement. The air tastes of treacle and iron. Carriage wheels rattle over granite sets. A ragged boy sings an Irish lament while trying to sell bootlaces that snap if you blink too hard. Threads of labour, luck, and law weave unseen nets across every street here, catching some, letting others slip. You exhale, watching breath drift upward like a faint prayer chased away by chimneys. A narrow terrace house in a quiet crescent draws your steps this evening. Its brickwork, the colour of weak tea, curtains forever half closed, windows well scrubbed yet revealing nothing. A polished brass knocker shaped like a cherub's face waits beneath a discreet ivy vine. You rap 3 times, pause, then twice more. A sequence whispered to you by a cabman who swore he only ferries parcels, never people. The door swings inward, opened by a maid in spotless calico. She greets you with the serene poise of someone receiving dinner guests, rather than strangers with jangling pockets. The vestibule smells of beeswax and something sweeter, perhaps jasmine oil burned to perfume the air. Your boots tread Turkish runners so plush they swallow sound, turning your footsteps into polite sighs. Wall sconces glow with filtered gaslight, softened by pink silk shades, casting a rose tint on everything, even your fingernails. The maid offers a courteous nod toward a cloakroom, inviting you to surrender hat, cape, and any lingering hesitation. You comply, noticing how she tags each item with ribboned cards, numbered but unnamed. The first hint of the establishment's obsessive discretion. An inner door opens to a parlour, styled in chinoiserie fantasy. Lacquer panels of crimson dragons, bamboo chairs lacquered until they gleam like pools of ink, and porcelain vases sprouting peacock feathers tall enough to tickle the ceiling moulding. A clock shaped like a pagoda chimes 7:15, its tone deliberately muted, so conversation can glide uninterrupted. On a mahogany sideboard rests a glass pitcher of lemonade tinted palest green. The hostess swears it cools nerves as well as any French cordial. Joke once sparkles when she confides the secret ingredient is cucumber water and audacity. Guests sit in 2s and 3s, reading illustrated journals or exchanging polite remarks about theatre reviews. No gambling, no rowdy song, only the faint rustle of silk skirts and the occasional click of a fan snapping shut. This is a brothel. Yet the masquerade of gentility is almost flawless. A mainstream historical fact slips effortlessly into the tableau. Under existing disorderly houses legislation, places like this face closure if neighbors complain, but respectable furnishing and quiet clientele reduce suspicion. Police inspectors may visit, announce themselves as health officers, accept an envelope, and move on to noisier venues. A liveried footman pours you a cordial of orgeat syrup, brightened with orange peel. He gestures toward a gilded card rack holding visiting cards edged in lilac, each bearing a pseudonym like Miss Ophelia, Miss Marigold, or Miss Cherie. You select one, slot it into a silver tray, and return the tray. Moments later, a door at the far end parts, and Miss Ophelia appears, gown shimmering the shade of seafoam. She greets you with a curtsy refined enough for court presentation, then invites you along a gallery lined with Japanese lanterns painted with kabuki masks. Corridors turn, ascend, descend, disorient. Miss Ophelia explains clients appreciate the illusion of depth, as if the house spreads beneath the city like an ant colony. Historians still argue whether clandestine parlors owed their survival more to neighborhood indifference or to active patronage by local officials, but within these walls the logistics feel more theatrical than political. You pause at a hidden peephole disguised as a decorative cherry blossom. She demonstrates how staff watch hallways for surprise inspectors or disgruntled spouses. Quirky tidbit. Many such houses installed revolving bookcases that pivot at a touch, allowing sudden metamorphosis from boudoir to reading room whenever trouble knocked. She stops before a lacquer door bearing a carved moonlit crane. Inside waits a sitting room no bigger than a railway compartment, yet extravagant in detail. Damask wallpaper of silver anemones, a low sofa piled with tasseled cushions, and a mantel clock guarded by two porcelain spaniels wearing golden collars. Ophelia pours steaming chocolate from a Wedgwood pot, its aroma velvet thick. She remarks that chocolate once required a license, akin to spirits, making it more contraband than champagne. Joke 2 arrives, as she claims some patrons visit solely for the legal thrill of sipping cocoa without a magistrate's blessing, intimacy coming as a mere courtesy extra. As you sample the drink, your gaze lands on a discreet notice framed beside the mantel. Guests are kindly reminded to maintain conversational tones at all times. The instruction feels redundant amid carpets so deep they could muffle thunder. Across the room, a small harmonium leans against velvet drapes. Ophelia demonstrates a chord progression she practices for Sunday chambers, concerts, music drifting soft enough not to disturb a moth on the lampshade. She explains that cultural flourishes reassure higher-paying clientele craving refinement with their rendezvous. A sheet of music bears annotations in 4 languages, suggesting lessons funded by these very visits. A silver tray holds a selection of rings, bracelets, and cameos. Clients purchase trinkets as tokens rather than paying directly for time. The house redeems them later at a jeweler who quietly melts and recasts each week. This circular commerce pleases both accountants and consciences. Meanwhile, operating costs rival grand hotels. Imported silk, exotic perfumes, bribes disguised as subscription fees to local improvement societies. She mentions the annual outlay for gas mantles alone could feed a charity orphanage. Joke 3 twinkles, as she observes that orphans might dislike gaslight cuisine anyway. Conversation turns briefly scholarly. Ophelia cites a medical pamphlet declaring moderate alcohol in brothels reduces violence. An argument contested by moral reformers, quoting contradictory data. You note the subtle shimmer of tension beneath cultured banter. Survival depends on reading politics as fluently as poetry. Official raids cluster after parliamentary sessions, when newspapers need scandalous headlines to fill columns. Quiet months follow funding reviews, when officials seek proofs of clean districts. She invites you to a balcony draped in ivy, overlooking a private courtyard lit by lanterns floating in a fountain. Water plops gently, adding a lullaby to the evening. You observe silhouettes of 2 other guests strolling among rose trellises, their voices hushed. The city beyond growls with omnibus wheels and costermonger cries. Yet here the roar shrinks to a distant murmur, like a storm sealed beneath glass. Ophelia places a crystal on the balcony rail. Explaining she charges it in moonlight to ward off ill fortune, a superstition gleaned from a Welsh aunt reputedly descended from Druids. Whether you believe it or not, the crystal catches lamplight and scatters crumbs of rainbow across the ivy leaves. A servant below plucks spent petals from the water, a chore performed with tongs to avoid wet sleeves. The servant counts softly, perhaps ensuring numerology favors tomorrow's fortunes. Back in the corridor, she escorts you toward the exit. A brass gong at the staircase base signals incoming deliveries. Linen bundles, French pastry, a cage of canaries bound for the music room. Birds, she notes, sing louder than any gramophone, masking stray giggles that might drift through keyholes. Some houses use mechanical songboxes, but the clockwork squeaks betray artifice. Live birds, ironically, provide greater privacy. At the cloakroom you reclaim your hat and cape. The maid slips a sprig of lavender into your lapel. A calling card scented, rather than written. She suggests you keep it enclosed in a diary page. Its perfume will remind you of civilized evenings. Stepping back onto the pavement, you notice neighbors drawing curtains tighter, eyes averted with meticulous politeness. Anyone might suspect, but nobody truly wishes proof. Gas lamps flicker as a draft snakes along the crescent. You head downhill toward the main road where carriages line up like beetles, thoraxes glossy beneath lampglow. The driver calls for fares to Piccadilly, promising a swift ride before midnight traffic snarls. The clandestine house recedes behind you, windows dark again, facade blending into proper respectability. You carry a faint trace of jasmine and chocolate on your coat sleeve, evidence as intangible as last night's dream yet rich enough to purchase lingering thoughts. A whistle rides the night air like a darting ghost as you turn into Bishopsgate's gloom. The street lamps still coughing yellow halos onto puddled cobblestones. A flick of a gloved hand catches your eye, a subtle crook of 2 fingers at thigh height, invisible to most but clear to those seeking what lies beyond polite society. You slow your pace, curious, and watch how a silent choreography unfolds along the pavement. 2 women lean casually against a gas post, their parasols angled, not against weather but as beacons. One tilt signals an invitation, another tilt, a warning that police boots echo nearby. Close to the curb, a man in a shabby bowler taps the crown twice before adjusting it. The motion summons a companion from the shadows. Quirky tidbit. Such signals were passed down like heirlooms, some tracing their lineage to 18th century ballad sellers who relied on the same gestures to indicate fresh wares. Now, they advertise living arrangements rather than paper verse. A chuckle bubbles when one woman calls her crimson shawl the original neon sign, claiming it draws patrons faster than any gas lamp. Joke one nestles easily when she adds that her shawl, despite its fame, also doubles as a blanket and a rain canopy. The air tingles with aromas of coal tar and roasted chestnuts from a vendor down the block, his brazier hissing each time a chestnut pops. The vendor calls every passerby Governor, a title that somehow flatters even the most frayed coats. The women use his pitch as cover, stepping forward only when his call drowns approaching footfalls. You follow on as she strolls beside a row of shuttered warehouses, where the shadows hang thick and obliging. She mutters the evening's password under her breath. 7 for a smile, 10 for a room. Not to you, but to the echo, as if repetition ensures the bargain stays tethered to the air. An alley mouth yawns wide. Lantern light trembling over damp brickwork. A figure in a long coat leans there, fiddling with a brass match safe. His hesitation betrays him as a newcomer. The woman guides him gently by the elbow, speaking low and soft, weaving a rhythm meant to soothe and entice. Historians still argue whether such coded exchanges fostered a sense of underground community or merely served as survival tactics. But for those here, The distinction hardly matters when rent and supper balance on every whispered syllable. Along the street's other side, a different set of signals plays out. One woman adjusts her bonnet ribbon into a knot with 3 loops, a cue to an acquaintance lurking near the tobacconist that she's secured a client and will not need backup. In contrast, a single loop signals danger, summoning another figure to hover nearby as quiet protection. A constable passes, tapping his truncheon against a lamppost in deliberate rhythm. The sound isn't official, it's a friendly warning for those inclined to scatter before his partner rounds the corner. Joke 2 peeks through when a woman mutters that some constables should be billed as dance instructors, given how much choreography they inspire. A hansom cab rattles by, hooves splashing through puddles. The driver tips his whip, not in anger but as code. His nod promises he will ferry any pair to an arranged lodging. No questions, provided the fare includes a pint at the end. Many drivers double as intermediaries. Their routes a map of private parlours and rooms available by the hour. A mainstream historical detail surfaces when a passing clerk whispers that by 1885, the Criminal Law Amendment Act would tighten scrutiny, driving such transactions deeper underground. But for now, the traffic flows as freely as the Thames. Further along, you pause beneath a creaking sign for a shuttered chandlery, its painted candle barely visible beneath soot. A woman approaches, her skirt hem lifted just high enough to reveal embroidered stockings, a deliberate advertisement more striking than any shouted price. She explains that stockings dyed in exotic hues command attention in districts where plain black rules the night. A quirky tidbit she shares. Some women soak ribbons in violet ink mixed with starch to mimic the sheen of imported silk, a craft they call making moonlight for legs that cannot afford Paris. At the edge of the pavement, a fiddler scrapes a lively reel, his bow bouncing so fast it could strike sparks. The tune isn't for art. It serves as a beacon, guiding patrons to his sister, who stands nearby pretending to study a broadsheet pasted on the wall. Every 4th measure, she twirls a strand of hair twice, a prearranged signal that the coast remains clear. Joke 3 sneaks in when the fiddler winks and admits his music is mostly noise, but the rhythm tricks drunks into thinking their legs dance better than their purses open. Around the corner, a shuttered haberdasher's shop hides a side door ajar, its frame chalked with tiny triangles no bigger than a fingernail. These marks, invisible to hurried eyes, denote meeting points. Inside, a narrow stair leads to a garret room where a single candle burns behind a screen. 2 silhouettes confer quietly, a third counts coins into a tobacco tin. No names exchanged, only nods. The entire negotiation sealed before the candle gutters out. Back on Bishopsgate proper, the gas lamps hiss louder as mist curls around their iron poles. The crowd thins as midnight draws near, leaving only scattered figures moving like pieces on a game board where rules change each hour. Every glance, gesture and tilt writes its own contract, fleeting yet binding until morning scatters the players. The night feels taut, full of encoded motions that might look like idle fidgets to an untrained passerby but form a lexicon of survival. You tuck your hands into your coat, wondering how many signals you've already missed, how many trades whispered around you while your attention lingered on chestnut smoke or fiddle tunes. The city exhales slowly, as if savoring the game, while a bell in the distance tolls one, marking another round of silent conversations written in shadow and lamplight. Rain spits against your cheek as you drift into a lantern-knit court near Fleet Market, the stones slick as eel skin beneath your soles. A low whistle threads the air, not a signal this time but the casual tune of a watchman leaning against a post, his oilskin cloak dripping steady rivulets into the gutter. His helmet gleams under the gaslight, and his grin widens when a shilling slides into his palm from a gloved hand, belonging to a woman in a patched velvet cape. She murmurs thanks, adjusts her bonnet, and slips away, leaving the watchman to hum louder, as if the silver brightened his mood. You shadow him as he strolls down the row, boots clicking in deliberate rhythm, a sound meant to announce his presence without alarming anyone too severely. Historians still argue whether these watchmen acted as genuine peacekeepers or unofficial toll collectors, but tonight the evidence tilts toward commerce more than justice. A mainstream fact hums beneath the drizzle. By the mid-1800s, the Metropolitan Police were known to arrest women for solicitation, yet many officers preferred to take tips in exchange for ignoring both the letter of the law and the raucous whispers drifting from alley mouths. A cart rattles by loaded with barrels bound for a gin shop, and the watchman raises a hand in greeting to the driver, who flicks a coin toward him without slowing. Quirky tidbit. Some drivers kept a stash of half-pennies tied to their whip handles, flinging them to constables as casual bribes to avoid inspections for unlicensed fares. You watch one coin skid across the stones, only to be scooped up by a barefoot boy who salutes both men before vanishing like steam. A woman with fox fur trim on her cuffs sidles closer, balancing an umbrella borrowed from some forgotten gentleman. She tilts her head toward the watchman and asks if any busy inspectors plan to patrol tonight. He scratches his chin, pretends to ponder, then names a figure high enough to pay for his breakfast and lunch tomorrow. Joke one sneaks in when he claims the fee also covers a complimentary weather forecast. Scattered showers of coins with light pockets expected. You follow as he turns into a narrower passage, where the brick walls lean inward, funneling every sound. Here, two more women wait beneath an iron arch, their lantern dimmed, so the glow barely kisses their boots. The watchman greets them by name, a familiarity that feels more club than law enforcement. He warns of a sergeant 2 streets over whose zeal matches his mustache in size, suggesting they stick to this lane where he can keep things calm. A chuckle rises when one woman calls him our midnight butler, tipping her bonnet in mock gratitude. Joke 2 twinkles as he bows deeply, declaring he'll polish the pavement next if they provide the soap. The lane itself smells of damp rope and old apples from a grocer's bin, the sort of mingled scents London grows best. A scrap of music drifts from a distant accordion, thin as candle smoke. A carriage halts nearby, the driver waiting as a gentleman with an elaborate mutton-nick-up beard exchanges whispers with the watchman. A folded note changes hands, and suddenly the muttonly chopped figure is escorted discreetly into a side door where candlelight blooms behind heavy curtains. The watchman pockets the note, with an ease suggesting years of practice. Further along, you notice a peeling sign advertising hot soup all hours, but the tin pot inside is mostly steam and cabbage stalks. Women warm their fingers above the pot while sliding coins toward the watchman. Not for soup, but for reassurance. The arrangement works like clockwork. They get a buffer from sudden raids. He gathers enough small silver to turn a modest profit. A mainstream detail ties it together despite official salaries. Constables in poorer districts often supplemented income through side payments, a practice tolerated so long as it avoided scandal or outright violence. At the end of the lane, a makeshift shelter has been propped beneath a torn awning. 3 figures sit on overturned crates, counting earnings in the glow of a tallow stub. The watchman lingers, clearing his throat softly to announce his presence. They each slide a token into his gloved palm. One offers a copper farthing, another a folded scrap of what looks like theatre tickets, the third a ring missing its stone. Quirky practice, this bartering. Some watchmen preferred trinkets they could pawn quietly, less traceable than coins should superiors take sudden interest. He tucks the items away, tips his helmet, and moves on, the drizzle darkening his cloak to near black. You trail behind, noting how his whistle resumes, jaunty now, rising above the hiss of rainfall on slate roofs. The street ahead opens into a brighter thoroughfare where omnibuses rumble and lamp sellers hawk polished brass reflectors. Here, his posture straightens, stride sharpens, and he becomes the image of proper law. Every coin now tucked beneath layers of polished authority. Joke 3 pops as a boy selling roasted nuts calls out, "Evening, Inspector," loud enough for the watchman to wince. The title outranks him by 3 levels. but the vendor insists it draws better sales. The watchman tosses him a halfpenny anyway, perhaps to pay for silence or simply to keep the joke rolling. The women in earshot smother giggles, their laughter curling through the damp like a warmer breeze than any stove could conjure. As the hour bell tolls twice, the watchman turns into another side street, his whistle softening to a hum. The drizzle slackens, leaving beads of water clinging to every iron railing like strings of tiny pearls. You notice the rhythm of the night shift settle, deals whispered, coins changing hands, lanterns dimmed or brightened depending on who approaches. The city's order holds, not by law alone, but by the unspoken agreements forged in shadow and silver. You stand at the mouth of the lane, tasting coalescing mist, and the faint sweetness of roasted nuts drifting your way. The watchman's humming fades into the maze of streets, leaving only the distant thud of carriage wheels and the sigh of the wind. The next turn will bring fresh voices, but for now, you linger, feeling the strange balance between law and livelihood sway like a lantern in the soft rain. A chill breeze sweeps along Whitechapel Road as you pause by a lamppost plastered with handbills, each promising cures for ailments no one dares to name aloud. The largest bears bold lettering, "Contagious Diseases Act Public Notice." Its wording warns women suspected of improper habits that they may be detained for examination at certified hospitals, their bodies prodded, swabbed, and recorded in ledgers thicker than Bibles. The notice trembles under the wind as if reluctant to deliver its message, but it cannot hide the cold truth. A woman in a soot-stained bonnet murmurs that inspectors lurk 2 streets over, waiting near a chemist's shop to catch those headed for taverns. She clutches your sleeve, whispering that once taken, you might not leave the infirmary for weeks, perhaps months, and always with a stain on your reputation. A mainstream fact drifts like fog through your thoughts. Beginning in the 1862nd, the Contagious Diseases Act targeted specific towns and later London, giving police and medical officers power to compel women to undergo invasive exams, often without solid evidence of infection. Historians still argue whether these laws truly curbed disease among soldiers and sailors, or simply punished the poor while leaving wealthier clients untouched. You cross the street, boots tapping a rhythm on uneven paving stones. A grey-coated inspector lingers near a lamplit doorway, his bowler tipped low, a leather notebook in hand. Each time a woman approaches, he mutters a name, jots notes, and signals to a constable lurking just beyond the pool of light. Those chosen vanish into a waiting carriage with curtained windows. The horses stamp impatiently, their breath fogging in the cold, as if even they dislike their cargo. Nearby, a chemist hawks his wares in a voice syrupy as his cough drops. He peddles hygienic powders and purifying draughts, claiming they will keep any lady unmolested by official interference. Joke one rustles here when he boasts that his tonic repels both illness and unpleasant in-eye laws, though no one seems certain which affliction it actually treats. Women exchange pennies for the small vials, hiding them deep in reticules as if the act alone grants safety from both disease and the dreaded carriage ride. Past the chemists, you step into the shadow of a railway arch where whispers echo like soft percussion. 2 women swap advice. Avoid Limehouse Basin tonight. Keep to streets where the gaslight falters, and if stopped, insist you're on your way to a sick aunt. One offers a curious tip, almost absurd rubber drop of onion juice at the corner of each eye so tears seem natural, convincing inspectors you are merely a grieving niece. Quirky, yes, but desperation can make a vegetable into armor. Across the cobbles, a public house spills laughter and fiddle tunes into the night. Its door swings open to release a gust of hops and fried onions. Yet even here, tension lurks. A patron warns that inspectors sometimes enter as customers, noting faces, and later flagging names to patrols outside. A serving girl leans in, whispering that one inspector fancies himself a poet and will let a woman go free if she recites a sonnet, preferably Shakespeare, without faltering. Joke 2 flickers when she adds that most patrons fake coughs to avoid hearing his rhymes, which, she says, sound worse than the examinations themselves. Further along, the familiar glow of a hospital lantern cuts through the fog. At the iron gates, 2 nurses in stiff caps usher new arrivals inside. Their starched aprons gleam like warning flags in the dimness. Through the bars, you glimpse women seated on benches, their faces pale beneath kerosene light. Some clutch rosaries, others stare blankly at tiled floors as footsteps echo down corridors beyond. The routine is methodical. Examination, mandatory treatment, documentation, release only when deemed clean. You notice a bill posted near the gate, advertising voluntary checkups, a gentle euphemism. Women who submit willingly receive a stamped certificate, proof for suspicious patrols that they are free to walk, unimpeded. Historians still argue whether these certificates empowered or humiliated their holders. For while they spared arrest, they branded the bearer as someone perpetually suspect. A hackney driver waits beside the hospital wall tapping his reins. He tells you in a low voice that, for a fee, he can deliver women to safer districts where inspectors rarely prowl. Though the fare often costs more than a week's earnings, he pats the side of his cab, as if it were a lifeboat adrift on a sea of bureaucracy. As the clock atop the nearby chapel chimes 11, a hush falls along the road. Even the vendors' cries soften. You catch the sound of boots on stone, regular and unhurried, the march of another patrol approaching. Women scatter into doorways, shawls drawn high, their silhouettes shrinking like shadows at sunrise. One darts behind a horse trough, splashing her hem in the brackish water. A small price to vanish from sight. Joke 3 stirs, when a stable boy mutters that the inspectors should be treated with onion tears themselves. Maybe then they'd weep enough to fog their own spectacles. The fog thickens, curling between iron railings, dimming every glow except the hospital lantern, which burns stubbornly like an eye refusing to close. The carriages roll on, wheels creaking, bound for brick halls where privacy dissolves into cold record books. You stand at the roadside, coal, smoke and disinfectant mingling in your nostrils, the air heavy with unease. In the distance, a whistle pierces once, twice, summoning another group to the waiting carriage. You adjust your coat and step carefully onward, the echo of boots and quills scratching in ledgers trailing you down the next street. The cobblestones glisten like polished slate beneath a gaslight haze, as you find yourself outside a chapel whose wooden doors stand ajar, spilling warm light and the faint strains of a hymn into the cold night. On the steps, a cluster of women in thick woolen shawls shuffle awkwardly, not for worship but because the doorway offers them a brief shield from the drizzle. Descending the chapel steps comes a stern lady in a bonnet trimmed with white lace, a basket of folded pamphlets tucked beneath her arm. She approaches with the practiced poise of someone who has rehearsed every syllable of her greeting. Her voice, clear as a bell, carries across the street. Salvation is at hand for those who seek a purer path. She presses a pamphlet into your hand before you can retreat. The title, framed by ornate flourishes, reads, "Hope for the Fallen," followed by pages of scripture, moral appeals, and a handwritten address for a home of reform. She assures you in a near whisper that the home offers safety, warm beds, and lessons in proper conduct. Joke 1 lands when she adds, perhaps unintentionally, that no dancing is permitted except when giving thanks, as if gratitude itself could serve as the only waltz allowed. Across the street, a bearded man in a broader-brimmed hat hoists a placard declaring, "Vice destroys nations." He waves it like a battle standard, his boots planted firmly in a puddle, as though defiance can hold back damp feet. Nearby, a pair of young girls, both clearly more curious than converted, giggle behind gloved hands as they imitate his dramatic gestures. A mainstream fact emerges in the dim lamplight. By the mid-19th century, organizations such as the Salvation Army and the London Female Mission patrolled streets, distributing literature and offering lodging to women they considered vulnerable. though their efforts often blurred the line between compassion and control. A drizzle-spattered preacher begins reciting lines from Isaiah, his voice shaking less from piety and more from the chill. Some passers-by pause, if only to share the meager warmth of the crowd. Others slip pamphlets into pockets without looking, knowing that refusal might bring unwanted stares. One reformer strikes a small triangle bell, each chime meant to signal the beginning of a walk of rescue. Women in the crowd glance nervously at each other, calculating whether following these bonneted figures means shelter or surrender. Historians still argue whether such missions saved lives, or merely corralled the desperate into a different kind of confinement. Near the curb, a mobile soup cart dispenses steaming ladles of broth labeled "Blessed Sustenance" in looping letters. The broth smells mostly of turnip and dill, but hands extend eagerly. Each recipient is thanked loudly by name, a gesture meant to affirm dignity, yet one that inadvertently draws curious eyes from the street. Joke 2 bubbles when a bystander mutters that the soup is holy because it performs miracles, turning turnip water into divine patience, as long as you close your eyes while swallowing. Further along, 2 reformers guide a trio of hesitant women toward a covered wagon parked beside the chapel. Its canvas sides display painted lilies, a symbol of purity that glows faintly in the lamplight. Inside, benches line each wall, and a kerosene heater flickers in the center. The air smells faintly of soap and lamp oil, not unpleasant but a sharp contrast to the fried onions drifting from a nearby tavern. One of the women whispers to another that these wagons carry passengers to reform homes where sewing, prayer, and silence fill the days. She hesitates on the step, weighing hunger against the promise of a regimented life. As you watch, another woman slips from the line entirely, ducking into the shadow of a carriage arch. She presses her back against cold brick, her breath clouding in the chill, choosing the familiar hazards of the street over the unknown rules behind that painted lily canvas. A reformer notices her retreat, but does not follow, instead handing another pamphlet to a sailor wandering by, perhaps hoping to convert more than one kind of soul this evening. Close to the chapel steps, a lantern-jawed man with a ledger records names of those willing to enter the home of reform. Quirky tidbit: some reform societies paid a bounty to those who brought in women, a practice that occasionally tempted informers to exaggerate claims about fallen habits just to earn a few coins. This led to disputes so sharp that, in certain districts, constables had to mediate between zealous reformers and angry families. A horse snorts nearby, its breath fogging like a chimney, as the covered wagon's wheels begin to creak forward. The women who chose to board sit stiffly, hands clasped, their faces lit by the soft orange glow of the heater. The reformer beside you hums a hymn under her breath, her lips forming words about redemption and light. For a fleeting moment, the street noise fades, the rumble of omnibuses, the hiss of gas lamps, even the faint echo of the preacher's bell. Then, from the direction of the tavern, a rowdy cheer erupts as a fiddler strikes up a jig, breaking the spell. The reformers exchange glances, tighten their shawls, and redouble their efforts, approaching new faces with pamphlets poised like tiny swords of righteousness. Joke 3 rustles softly when a cart driver mutters that pamphlets breed faster than London pigeons, and at least pigeons don't ask where you'll be sleeping tonight. The wagon rolls off, its painted lilies fading into the fog. The preacher's voice wanes, replaced by the ever-present hum of the city. You remain on the steps, the pamphlet still in your hand, the print smudged by drizzle. The hymn inside whispers promises of safety, yet the street hums with the pull of freedom, even if that freedom is frayed at the edges. The gaslight above flickers once, twice, and steadies as the drizzle eases to a mist, leaving you poised between two paths, both shadowed, both uncertain. A gust of wind carries the faint scent of boiled starch as you follow a narrow lane to a brick building crowned with a carved wooden sign reading, Hope House. Its windows glow dimly, their curtains drawn tight, though the low hum of a hymn drifts through the cracks. A matron in a crisp navy dress greets you at the door, her starched cap so rigid it could probably stand without her. She ushers you into a vestibule that smells of soap, candle grease, and a trace of lavender, all arranged carefully to mask the underlying must of damp plaster. Inside, the hall is lined with benches where a dozen women sit, hands folded neatly on their laps, faces still pale from the cold night air. They avoid looking directly at the matron, though their eyes flick toward a chalkboard listing the day's routine: dawn prayers, sewing lessons, midday broth, moral instruction, evening hymn, lights out at 9. A mainstream fact hovers as you glance at the board: Victorian rescue homes like this, often funded by churches or philanthropists, proliferated after the 1842nd, promising reform for women deemed wayward by neighbors or police, but enforcing strict schedules that sometimes mirrored the discipline of prisons. The matron leads you into a dining hall where a pot of porridge bubbles atop a blackened iron range. A serving girl, herself barely past girlhood, ladles portions into tin bowls. The porridge steams, thin enough to ripple like pond water when stirred. A girl at the table jokes softly that at least the porridge can double as wallpaper paste, her grin quickly smothered by a glance from the matron. Joke one hums as another whispers that if you stir it long enough, it might form the backbone of a new bridge across the Thames. You follow the group as they file into a sewing room lit by tall windows fogged with condensation. Rows of women sit at pine tables, fingers darting through fabric, some mending donated garments for resale, others piecing quilts destined for charity bazaars. A curious tidbit surfaces when a volunteer mentions that many quilts bear hidden initials sewn into corner seams, the subtle signatures of women whose names otherwise vanish from records. The practice, part rebellion and part legacy, leaves quiet proof that they once shaped these scraps into something enduring. The day's moral instruction takes place in a parlor furnished with somber oak chairs and a faded rug patterned with lilies. A clergyman with spectacles perched on his nose reads from a leather-bound book, his voice rising and falling in a cadence meant to soothe yet somehow sharpens the stillness. He speaks of redemption, duty, and the virtues of humility. Historians still argue whether such lectures truly offered comfort or merely reinforced subservience, but the women listen, some nodding, others staring at their calloused hands as if counting the seams stitched since dawn. Beyond the parlor, a narrow corridor leads to dormitories lined with iron bedsteads, each draped in a coarse woolen blanket. The air here feels heavier, thick with the scent of damp linen and lye soap. At the far end, a wooden door creaks open to reveal a small infirmary where a nurse prepares tinctures of camphor and valerian. She remarks with a faint smile that her shelves carry more bottles of tonics than the average apothecary, though most are simply water scented with herbs. Joke too lands when she admits that half the cures could be replaced with a warm bath and 2 biscuits, if only the budget stretched that far. In the courtyard, a line of laundry flutters in the faint breeze, sheets flapping like restless doves. A young woman scrubs at a copper tub, her knuckles reddened by cold water. She explains that for some, these homes feel safer than the streets, a shield against inspectors and unpaid debts. But for others, the rules chafe worse than winter wind. A quirky tidbit catches your ear. A few homes offered small dowries to women who proved reformed, paying a token sum if they married a man vetted by the Board of Trustees. The dowry, however, often amounted to little more than a dress, a Bible, and perhaps a few shillings, symbolic gestures rather than fresh starts. Evening descends, and the women gather in a chapel lit by tall candles whose flames waver with each draught sneaking beneath the door. Their voices rise in a hymn, wavering but earnest, echoing through rafters darkened by years of soot. The matron stands at the back, hands clasped, her expression a blend of vigilance and pride, as though every note sung pushes these women 1 inch closer to redemption. Outside, the city's hum persists, the rattle of cartwheels, the occasional burst of laughter from a tavern, but here, the hymn momentarily dulls the world beyond. Joke 3 stirs when one girl, after the final verse, whispers that she prefers singing off-key because it guarantees she won't be recruited for Sunday solos, sparing her from another layer of performance in a life already full of acts. A muffled giggle travels down the row, quickly hidden behind bowed heads, as the matron announces lights out. The candles are snuffed one by one until only the faint glow of a dying ember remains in the grate. You step outside through a side door into the cool air, the sky bruised purple as clouds gather. The wooden sign above the door creaks softly in the wind, and the faint smell of boiled starch drifts out, mingling with the sharper scent of chimney smoke from nearby houses. The contrast between the rigid calm inside and the restless streets beyond lingers as you walk back toward the gaslit road, your breath curling upward like pale ribbons against the gathering dark. Salt stings your nostrils as you step off the main thoroughfare and onto the slick planks of the West India docks, where the night hums with the rhythm of waves slapping against hulls and the clang of chains pulled taut. The air feels heavier here, laden with fish oil, tar and coal smoke drifting from moored steamers. You dodge a puddle that smells suspiciously like brine and ale as a group of sailors, their coats crusted with salt, crowd around a man selling meat pies from a dented tin cart. His pies steam, fragrant with pepper and onion, a welcome reprieve from the sour tang of the tide. A woman leans against a coiled rope beside a bollard, her shawl patched in 3 different fabrics but arranged with a practiced drape. She glances at each sailor's purse more than his face. A mainstream fact slips in as easily as the tide. Docklands were notorious for their floating population of transient workers and visitors, and many women here work solely on nights when ships arrived, counting on sailors with fresh wages to offer quick coins for brief companionship before the next tide carried them away. A raucous laugh erupts from a nearby warehouse door, where a fiddler scrapes a jig, his bow racing as fast as the dice rattling on overturned barrels. The gamblers shout in at least 4 languages, their voices tangling like fishing lines. A lanky sailor raises his tin cup, spilling grog across the deck, and bellows for another tune. Joke 1 sidles in when he claims the fiddler's bow hairs must be stolen from the ship's cat, because they screech just the same, earning groans and grins from the gathering. You move along the wharf as a steam crane creaks overhead, its operator silhouetted in the glow of a ship's lantern. Below, 2 dockhands haggle over the price of salvaged oranges dropped during unloading. One woman approaches them, her bonnet tilted low, and offers to carry a sack if they share a piece of fruit. A quirky tidbit drifts from the conversation. Some women here make extra pennies by collecting spilled citrus, which they then boil with sugar into makeshift marmalade sold to sailors longing for a taste of home. The oranges tonight, flecked with soot, are destined for both breakfast and bargaining. Near the dock wall, a wooden tavern squats with crooked shutters. Its sign, painted with a mermaid holding a tankard, sways in the wind, creaking with each gust. Inside, the floor is littered with sawdust to soak up spills both liquid and human. A fiddler swaps his bow for a penny whistle, piping a tune lively enough to rattle the rafters. At a corner table, a woman with a bright scarf tied at her throat leans close to a group of stokers tracing lines on a folded map. She points toward lodging houses on Ratcliffe Highway, promising beds, food, and a warm hour of company for a price. The stokers laugh, toss coins, and argue over who gets to follow first. Outside again, a watchful figure stands beneath the eave of a chandlery, his coat buttoned tight despite the damp. He's a fixer of sorts, someone who arranges introductions for a cut of the profit. His presence feels as steady as the tide, neither welcome nor shunned, simply part of the dockside ecology. Historians still argue whether such middlemen acted as protectors or predators, but either way, their role greased the wheels of the nocturnal trade as efficiently as any lantern oil. The cries of fishmongers setting up for the morning market cut through the clamour. One man lifts a wriggling eel from a barrel, its silver body flashing like liquid metal before he drops it into a wooden tub. The sight makes a passing sailor gag, prompting a round of jeers. Joke 2 surfaces when the fishmonger boasts that his eels are so fresh they could enlist in the Navy if given uniforms, their writhing tails punctuating his claim. Further down the quay, a woman hums a low ballad as she trails a sailor toward a boarding house with smoke curling from its chimney. The sign reads, "Rooms let by the night or hour." The smell of frying herring drifts from its kitchen, mingling oddly with the sweetness of rum from a passing barrel cart. The sailor, already weaving from grog, drops a coin. She snatches it midway with reflexes sharp enough to make the dockhands whistle in approval. She tucks the coin into her glove and ushers him through the door, disappearing behind creaking hinges before the next wave of workers stumbles ashore. As you turn toward the river, the moon glints on black water, flecked with reflections of lanterns swinging from ship masts. A steamer sounds its whistle, deep and mournful, and the vibration rattles the crates stacked along the quay. Nearby, a cluster of women cluster around a brazier, sharing warmth as they trade notes, on which captains pay promptly, and which demand company without coins. Quirky commerce blooms again when one mentions she barters tins of condensed milk from ship kitchens, trading them to street vendors for bread she can resell in smaller pieces at dawn. Joke 3 arrives when a burly dockhand, overhearing the barter plans, claims he once tried condensed milk in his tea, but it clung to his moustache for 3 days, turning me into a dairy exhibit. The group bursts into laughter, the sound rolling across the quay like a friendly tide. The hour grows late, and the dock quiets except for the lapping of water and the distant thrum of ship engines. Smoke coils upward from scattered chimneys, tracing pale ribbons against the night sky. You linger by a mooring post, feeling the damp wood beneath your hand, listening to the murmured bargains, the hiss of lanterns, and the low moan of the river as another ship slips from its berth and drifts toward the open sea. The smell of salt and soot lingers as you turn away, boots tapping softly on the worn planks, carrying you back toward the maze of streets where the tide of voices flows on until morning. Gaslight flickers off polished brass handles as you step into a wide doorway along Regent Street, where the faint scent of sandalwood and bergamot wafts outward. A doorman in tailored livery nods politely, ushering you into a vestibule paneled with walnuts so glossy it reflects your coat buttons. The hush inside is immediate, a thick velvet of quiet broken only by the soft shuffle of slippers across Turkish runners. The air is warm, layered with perfumes and the faintest murmur of a distant piano playing a waltz. Beyond the curtained arch, a parlor unfolds that feels more like a private club than anything scandalous. The carpet is thick, patterned with intricate vines, and the ceiling boasts plaster roses gilded at their tips. Guests sip champagne from cutty glass flutes, their conversations dipping into topics like opera schedules, investment rumors, and the latest scandal involving a duke's imported racehorses. A mainstream fact glides beneath the civility. In upscale parlors such as these, the clientele consisted largely of wealthy merchants, minor aristocrats, and visiting dignitaries who valued polished company as much as physical indulgence, ensuring the house remained shielded by both money and influence. A hostess in a gown the color of moonlight approaches, her pearls glinting as she smiles with the ease of someone accustomed to managing nobles and bankers alike. She gestures toward a side table where crystal decanters hold cognac and sherry, alongside a bowl of sugared almonds. Joke 1 twinkles when she confides that the almonds double as a sobriety tool, since anyone eating more than a handful becomes too busy chewing to speak rashly about stocks or mistresses. She guides you through an archway into a music room where a pianist in a tailored waistcoat lets his fingers drift over ivory keys. The tune is Chopin, soft and unhurried, the kind of melody that feels like candlelight translated into sound. Guests sit on embroidered settees, some leaning in for murmured conversations, others closing their eyes as though they came solely for the music. A quirky tidbit emerges when the hostess explains that these houses often hired musicians and poets for evening programs, their performances serving as a genteel prelude before any private arrangements, which kept up appearances for clients keen on discretion. Through another corridor lined with gilt mirrors, you find a drawing room where two gentlemen debate the relative merits of port versus claret, their voices low and precise. A woman with a violet ribbon at her throat pours their glasses, her poise matching any duchess at a formal supper. She excuses herself with a smile, gliding toward a spiral staircase draped with a runner embroidered in golden swirls. Historians still argue whether such establishments genuinely offered a more refined alternative to street trades, or simply wrapped the same bargains in velvet and porcelain, but the illusion here is seamless enough to convince even skeptical eyes. On the upper floor, doors open into suites decorated with gilt-framed landscapes and plush settees in jewel tones. One room contains a writing desk, with fresh stationery embossed in gold leaf, allowing guests to pen notes that the staff will discreetly deliver anywhere in the city. A silver tray beside the inkstand holds folded cards with invented names: Mr. Ashcroft, Miss Lavinia, Lady E, ensuring anonymity remains intact. A quirky custom surfaces when the hostess mentions that regular patrons sometimes exchange playful coded letters through the house, leaving verses or riddles for the staff to circulate, turning every visit into a quiet parlor game. In one suite, a servant arranges a tray of petites, fours and crystal goblets, the scents of almond and orange peel mingling with the glow of a crackling fire. The woman attending this room, wearing a gown of emerald silk, offers you a glass of sherry and points out the porcelain clock on the mantel. Its chime is deliberately soft, designed to remind guests of time passing without breaking the tranquil mood. Joke 2 arrives, when she remarks that if the clock ever runs fast, it's only because the fire prefers punctual patrons. Downstairs again, the hostess leads you to a discreet library, where shelves brim with leather-bound volumes of poetry and history. Guests may borrow any book, provided they leave a personal token, a cufflink, a ribbon, a coin, as collateral. This odd system, she explains, deters theft and builds camaraderie, as many patrons later retrieve their items alongside a note or a jest from another visitor. The quiet exchanges become their own entertainment, weaving a tapestry of private jokes that never leave the building. A mainstream detail whispers from a ledger on a polished desk. The accounts list contributions not just for furniture and staff but for civic donations, a polite term for the monthly sums discreetly given to city officials and local charities, ensuring both goodwill and blind eyes. These offerings often spared such houses from raids, allowing the music, the murmurs, and the softly chiming clocks to continue undisturbed. Near the exit, the doorman retrieves your coat, slipping a small envelope into the pocket without a word. Inside, you later find a pressed violet, scented faintly with bergamot, a token of your evening, and, perhaps, a subtle invitation to return. Joke 3 lingers when the doorman winks and says, "The violet lasts longer than the champagne, but not as long as your bill will." Stepping back into the cool night, the muffled hum of Regent Street wraps around you again. The glow from the house fades into the broader constellation of lamps along the avenue, leaving only the faint aroma of sandalwood on your sleeve and the soft ghost of Chopin still echoing in your thoughts. The distant clip of hooves on pavement leads you onward, deeper into a city where luxury and secrecy share the same polished corridors. The wind off the Thames carries a chill as you pause at a street vendor's stand piled with luridly illustrated pamphlets, their covers screaming with crimson ink and exaggerated headlines. "The Sinful Sisters of Soho," declares one, the title sprawled above a sketch of a woman with eyes like lanterns and a neckline that plunges far deeper than propriety ever sanctioned. Another, bound with cheap string, boasts "Confessions of a Fallen Angel," complete with a woodcut of a cloaked stranger handing coins under a gas lamp. The vendor, his hands stained with printer's ink, hawks them for a penny apiece, his voice rasping like a saw against pine. You flip through one pamphlet, the pages smelling of fresh ink and coal soot. each chapter promising some shocking revelation that feels less like fact and more like a stage play written after too much gin. A mainstream historical thread winds beneath the drama, so-called penny dreadfuls, and similar sensational publications surged through Victorian London, feeding a public appetite for scandal while blurring the line between cautionary tale and titillation. Circulation figures soared as these papers peddled tales of brothel intrigues and mysterious disappearances, rarely troubling themselves with accuracy. At the end of the stall, a broadsheet features a headline about the Phantom of Piccadilly, a supposed figure who prowls fog-shrouded alleys to avenge moral decay. Joke 1 slides easily when the vendor mutters that the phantom likely just owes him sixpence and hides in the fog to dodge payment. Passers-by snicker, tossing coppers onto his crate as they tuck the papers into coat pockets, eager for evening entertainment. Further down the lane, a dimly lit coffee house draws a steady stream of readers, its windows fogged with condensation. Inside, the air smells of chicory and damp wool, and tables brim with men in bowler hats flipping through serialized shockers. One paper describes a V's den, with more mirrored walls than a palace, complete with a fictional duchess secretly managing the whole affair. Historians still argue whether these accounts reflected any semblance of truth, or were purely crafted to stir public outrage, but the readers seem less interested in truth than in having something to mutter about on their tram rides home. At a corner table, a woman in a simple bonnet quietly sells copies of a competing pamphlet she claims contains the real stories that the others embellish. Her issue is thinner, printed on rougher paper, but she insists it draws from court transcripts and police ledgers. A quirky tidbit surfaces as she explains that some women sold these pared-down accounts outside courthouses, earning more from gossip-hungry crowds than they ever had in domestic service. She fans her stack dramatically, offering you one with a conspiratorial wink, as if a single page could unlock secrets the city refuses to say aloud. The coffeehouse owner, a stout man with a walrus moustache, polishes mugs while keeping one ear tuned to the chatter. Every time someone mentions a particularly salacious story, he slides another pamphlet across the counter, claiming it contains the uncut version. Joke 2 surfaces when a patron complains the print is so sloppy, it looks like a squid inked the page, prompting the owner to shrug and say, "Scandal tastes better blurry." Back on the street, another vendor sets up a crude hand-cranked lantern projector, casting shadowy illustrations from popular pamphlets onto a Sutter Street wall. Children gape at the flickering images while adults trade whispered commentary. The vendor charges a farthing per view, calling it education, though the sketches lean more towards spectacle than scholarship. The faint smell of burnt oil hangs in the air as the crank turns, the images leaping and stretching across the bricks like restless spirits. Further along, a young clerk leans against a lamppost, reading aloud to a small crowd from a serialized tale about a mysterious Eastern sorceress seducing London's elite. The language drips with stereotypes and absurdity, yet the listeners hang on every word, coins ready to buy the next installment. A quirky detail emerges as the clerk notes that some publishers plant their own actors in crowds to feign shock, boosting sales by convincing bystanders the story is too scandalous to ignore. A cart rolls by, its driver singing a bawdy rhyme, clearly borrowed from one of the penny prints. The tune sticks in your head despite its ridiculous rhymes about chimney sweeps and duchesses. Joke 3 settles when a passing cab horse snorts so loudly at the chorus that the crowd erupts in laughter, claiming even beasts know a bad lyric when they hear one. As evening deepens, the glow of gas lamps turns the fog into molten gold, and the last of the pamphlet vendors packs away his wares, coins clinking in his pouch. The coffee house shutters creak closed, leaving only a faint glow behind frosted glass. The echoes of exaggerated tales linger in the damp air, stories that will be retold at supper tables, in factory yards, and aboard carriages rattling across cobblestones. Whether these printed scandals hold a kernel of truth or not, they weave themselves into the city's pulse, fueling both fascination and fear. As the night folds around you, and the streets hum with the murmur of voices, craving one more outrageous story before sleep, the fog carries a metallic tang tonight as you drift past a row of apothecaries whose windows glow faintly like watchful eyes. Each glass pane displays neat rows of green and amber bottles, their labels promising remedies for female indisposition and secret afflictions. One shopkeeper, a man with a face as pale as his chalky powders, waves you inside, the bell above the door giving a timid chime. The scent of camphor and crushed mint fills your lungs, sharper than any winter gust. Behind the counter, he whispers of his latest curative, a tonic said to fortify the blood and banish unclean humours. He pours a spoonful into a porcelain cup, the liquid glinting a deep silvery hue. A mainstream fact lingers in the vapours. Mercury-based treatments were widely used for venereal diseases in Victorian England, despite their toxicity, often leaving patients trembling, drooling, or worse before the infection subsided. The apothecary insists his tonic is safe, though his hands, speckled with grey stains, betray how many bottles he's handled without gloves. Joke one flickers when he claims that any mild shaking it causes can double as a lively dance for those wishing to impress at music halls. A woman enters, her bonnet hiding a face lined by exhaustion more than age. She slides a coin across the counter, murmuring that she cannot afford another hospital stay. The apothecary hands her a vial no longer than a finger, instructing her to sip sparingly and avoid bread, which he swears dulls its effect. Historians still argue whether such instructions were born from medical theory or pure invention, but for many desperate souls, the line between quackery and cure blurred in the fog of need. Stepping back onto the cobbles, you catch sight of a street vendor hunched over a crate filled with cork-stoppered bottles, each containing a murky green tincture. He touts it as a sure safeguard for the virtuous and weary, a phrase vague enough to lure both the fearful and the skeptical. A quirky tidbit rises from his patter. He claims the liquid is infused with powdered emerald to attract only good company, though the glimmer in his bottles likely comes from ground glass or mica. Still, he finds buyers, their shillings clinking into his tin with each whispered exchange. Around the corner, a low-roofed room marked by a painted mortar and pestle hums with subdued voices. Inside, women perch on benches, while a young chemist, sleeves rolled high, stirs a bubbling copper pot. The concoction smells faintly of licorice and sulphur. He promises his draught can cleanse the body of lingering troubles in a single night, though the side effects may include headaches and a taste in the mouth, like licking an old penny. Joke, too, finds a perch when one woman mutters that she would rather lick 2 new pennies than swallow his brew, drawing a muffled laugh despite the heavy air. In the far corner, a physician in a rumpled frock coat examines a glass syringe gleaming under a lone gas jet. He offers injections of a new compound, a blend of arsenic and herbal extracts, insisting it will balance the humours and lift the spirits. Some women agree, clutching their skirts tighter as he readies the needle, while others slip quietly out the side door, preferring untreated ailments to experiments. A mainstream fact emerges here. By the 1882nd, arsenic-based therapies were promoted for certain infections, despite causing nausea, skin lesions, and, in severe cases, organ failure. Back on the street, you follow the faint glow of a swinging oil lamp to a boarding house where a matron sells home remedies brewed in her own kitchen. She boasts of her miracle tea, steeped with juniper berries and ground nutmeg, claiming it can chase away shadowed ailments and bring restful sleep. Her recipe, whispered conspiratorially, includes a drop of laudanum to calm the nerves. A quirky detail comes when she reveals that she adjusts the laudanum dose based on whether her client plans to work that night, adding, a dash more for those who must smile through the pain. Across from the boarding house, a tall figure in a shabby top hat peddles pamphlets detailing folk cures collected from across the British Isles. One suggests rubbing ash from a burned horseshoe into a poultice of goose fat to ward off infections. Another advises swallowing boiled dandelion roots with milk as a cleanser of wicked humours. Joke 3 surfaces when the pamphleteer, in a rare moment of honesty, admits he has never tested these remedies but assures you the goose fat is at least edible, if nothing else works. The fog thickens, carrying the mingled scents of coal, smoke, mint, and medicinal sulphur. A woman coughs into her shawl as she steps past you, clutching a vial like a charm against fate. Behind her, the apothecary shutters his windows, the glow of his lamps fading until only the street's gas lights remain. The cobblestones gleam like slick slate, each puddle reflecting the faint gold of the lamps above. The night feels quieter now, though the clink of coins and the murmur of hushed bargains still echo between the brick walls. You continue along the glistening lane, the distant toll of a church bell marking midnight. Each step carries the faint aftertaste of mint and smoke, a reminder of the desperate brews and bottled promises scattered through London's shadowed streets. The echoes of laughter from the licorice-scented room drift faintly behind you as the fog swallows the glow, leaving you alone with the soft hiss of gaslight and the lingering tang of medicine in the air. A faint cry echoes from a row of narrow houses along Lambeth Marsh, the sound sharp enough to pierce the hum of wagon wheels on the nearby bridge. You follow the noise to a doorway marked only by a chalked X, where a crooked sign above reads Nursing and Care for Infants Discreet Services. The windows are dark despite the hour, curtains drawn so tight that no sliver of gaslight leaks through. The door creaks open before you can knock, revealing a woman with a kerchief tied under her chin and a ledger clutched to her chest. Her voice is low, clipped, as she asks if you've come to place or collect. The air inside smells of sour milk and damp linen, with a faint undercurrent of something metallic, like a penny left too long in water. Along the hallway, a line of wooden cradles sits against the wall, some rocking gently as the floorboards tremble with passing carts. A mainstream fact lingers in that dim light. Victorian baby farms became notorious by the late 19th century, where women, often overwhelmed or shamed by circumstance, paid caretakers to take their infants, sometimes for fostering, sometimes for burial, with the line between the two intentionally blurred. In the back parlour, the caretaker stirs a pot of thin gruel over a blackened stove. She claims each child receives proper feeding and warm blankets, though the blankets look more grey than white, and the pot's contents barely coat the ladle. A curious detail emerges as she explains her tiered fee structure. For an additional few shillings, she'll use the good milk, while the poorest pay for nothing more than barley water. Joke 1 trembles into the gloom when she mutters that her cats eat better than some of her charges, though she quickly stifles the remark with a glance toward the ledger. Further in, a mother stands by a cracked window, clutching a swaddled bundle so tightly her knuckles pale. Her dress is plain, her boots worn to the stitching. She whispers to the caretaker that she cannot manage another week without work, and offers her last coins. The caretaker writes her name in the ledger, then nods toward an adjoining room where other women wait, faces shadowed, each balancing the same mixture of shame, hope, and dread. Historians still argue whether many baby farmers intended to care for their charges, or viewed them solely as short-term income, but the results too often tilted toward tragedy, as mortality rates in these places far exceeded even London's grim averages. Near the hearth, a woman hums softly while sewing labels into tiny linen bags. She explains that some families request ashes returned if the infant does not survive, believing it grants closure. A quirky tidbit unfolds when she mentions that these ashes are often mixed with dried lavender, so the parcel smells less like grief and more like a drawer of fresh linens. The caretaker adds, almost cheerfully, that some clients even request a ribbon, as though ceremony can soften the ledger's cold arithmetic. Outside, a delivery boy arrives with a sack of coal, his boots leaving black smudges across the threshold. He jokes, perhaps too lightly, that his coal outlasts the farm's tenants, earning a sharp glare from the caretaker, but a stifled laugh from one of the waiting mothers. Joke 2 lingers bitterly in the air, floating with the coal dust as the boy retreats into the fog. You step back into the lane for a moment, the mist heavy with chimney smoke and the faint briny scent of the river. A nearby woman whispers about another farm down by Battersea Fields where the caretaker takes the infants no one visits, a phrase that feels heavier than the fog itself. She warns to always ask for references, though her eyes betray the futility in the advice. Desperation rarely pauses to read testimonials. Back inside, the caretaker directs you to a narrow back room where a midwife, sleeves rolled past her elbows, tends to a row of bassinets. The floor creaks beneath each of her steps, and the walls are lined with shelves stacked with tiny clothes, most of them second-hand. She explains that some mothers leave instructions to reclaim their children once they've found stable work, while others leave only first names, no addresses. A mainstream note strikes as you recall that public outrage over these practices eventually led to the Infant Life Protection Act of 1872, though enforcement remained weak for years, leaving many infants in peril. Long after Parliament's proclamations, a tabby cat weaves between the bassinets, tail flicking, as if guarding or perhaps counting the tiny bundles. The midwife sets a saucer of milk on the floor, its pale circle glowing faintly in the firelight. Quirky commerce whispers again when she reveals that some caretakers sold unused milk portions to neighbors for profit, claiming it came from healthy stock, even when watered down past recognition. Joke 3 rustles quietly when one of the mothers mutters that the cat, plump and glossy, is the only creature thriving under this roof. The midwife hides a smile, then draws the curtains tighter as a carriage rattles past, its lanterns spilling brief, accusing light across the cradles. The room falls silent, save for the faint pop of the fire and the rhythmic sway of the cradles along the wall. Outside, the fog presses its weight against the window panes, muffling the sounds of passing hooves and distant voices. You step back into the hall, the sour scent of milk and soot clinging to your coat, and out into the marsh lane, where the river's breath curls like smoke around your boots. The night feels heavier now, its quiet layered with more than mist, and each footstep seems to echo with the creak of those wooden cradles behind you. Your steps carry you along a cobbled road, lined with high stone walls, their tops crowned with coils of frost-silvered ivy. At the end stands a set of black iron gates, their bars tall enough to scrape the sky, each tipped with a spearhead. A weathered plaque reads, "St. Margaret's Laundry for Penitent Women," its letters dulled by soot and years of indifferent rain. A bell rope hangs by the gate, frayed yet functional. When it's pulled, the clang that follows is deep enough to rattle the teeth of the stone lions carved into the gateposts. Inside, the air tastes of soap and ash, a sharpness that sticks to your tongue. Long rows of steaming vats fill the central hall, each exhaling clouds of vapor so thick they bead on your lashes. Bare-armed women scrub heavy linens, their skirts tucked high, the rhythm of their labor marked by the squeal of mangle rollers and the hiss of water poured from copper kettles. A mainstream fact hovers like steam above the scene. Throughout Victorian Britain, so-called Magdalen laundries took in women labelled as fallen or wayward, offering them food and shelter in exchange for relentless, unpaid work, often framed as moral purification rather than economic exploitation. The matron, a tall figure in a starched black dress, strides between the rows with a cane tapping the flagstones. She does not strike anyone, but each tap commands spines to stiffen and shoulders to straighten. One worker whispers, just loud enough for you to hear, that the matron times every task by an hourglass on her belt. Joke 1 surfaces when another mutters that the sand moves slower than their spirits but faster than their chances of leaving. earning a quick snort before silence swallows the laughter again. In a side room, rows of iron hooks hold freshly boiled garments, their fabric steaming in the dim light. A younger girl, barely past her teens, explains that much of this laundry comes from wealthy boarding schools and grand houses, their owners blissfully unaware or indifferent that the work is done by women barred from leaving these grounds without written permission. Historians still argue whether such laundries truly rehabilitated women or simply locked them into years of unacknowledged servitude. As records reveal, many spent decades laboring within these walls, their wages recorded as grace rather than coin. Through a doorway the dining hall stretches, sparse and echoing. Wooden benches line long trestle tables, and a cauldron of barley stew sits on a low hearth, filling the air with a faint scent of root vegetables and smoke. A volunteer ladles portions into wooden bowls while reciting a psalm, her voice steady despite the ladle's occasional splash. A quirky detail catches your attention when one worker whispers that the stew is so thin they use it to starch the collars on Sundays, a joke that elicits a brief flicker of amusement before the matron's shadow sweeps past again. Up a narrow stairwell, you find the dormitory, where neat rows of iron beds stretch wall to wall, each covered by a single coarse blanket. The windows, high and narrow, let in little more than a slit of grey daylight. In the corner, a locked cupboard contains bundles of letters and small keepsakes, confiscated to protect the soul from distraction. One older woman murmurs that she hasn't seen her daughter's handwriting in 3 years. The matron, she says, believes the letters invite worldly temptation. Joke too flickers bitterly when another whispers that the only temptation in here is to steal the hourglass and bury it in the stew. Back outside, in a cloistered courtyard, lines of drying linens whip in the cold wind like surrender flags. A nun, her habit pale with age, feeds scraps of bread to a flock of sparrows clustered by a water trough. She explains that the birds keep the courtyard free of flies in the warmer months, earning their crumbs as working companions. A quirky tidbit surfaces when she adds that some women secretly sew a single sparrow feather into the hems of their work aprons, believing it brings swifter hands and softer matronly gazes. A bell tolls from the main tower, calling everyone to evening prayer. The workers file silently into a small chapel where candles burn low in iron sconces, their flames winking against the whitewashed walls. The hymn they sing drifts through the rafters, thin but steady, mingling with the faint hiss of the laundry vat still cooling in the distance. The sound feels both resigned and defiant, as though each note carries a hidden wish folded between the lines of scripture. As the service ends, the matron dismisses the women with a curt nod, her hourglass turned once more. The workers descend the stair, slippers scuffing the stone, their breaths forming ghostly clouds in the chilly air. In the dormitory, the lamps are dimmed until only one faint glow remains near the locked cupboard, a reminder of lives paused behind iron keys. Joke 3 lingers softly when a girl whispers into the dark that she dreams of trading all the hourglasses for a single clock that forgets to chime, a thought that coaxes a quiet ripple of laughter across the rows of beds. Outside, the wind presses against the window panes, and the faint rustle of linens on the drying line sounds like a distant sea, calling to those who cannot answer. The heavy gates close with a groan, locking in the faint glow of the chapel and the steaming scent of soap. Beyond the walls, the city hums as usual, but inside, time trickles grain by grain, measured not by clocks but by sand and the endless churn of the mangles. You step back into the frosted street, your breath rising like smoke as the bells toll again. Muffled now by stone and distance, the fog feels thicker along Holborn as you follow a narrow alley to a newsstand stacked with ledgers and broadsheets, each offering figures in dense columns that glimmer faintly under the gaslight. A clerk, his spectacles fogged at the rims, flips a page and frowns at the rows of numbers. They'll never agree on how many, he mutters, holding the sheet at arm's length so the ink smell doesn't settle in his mustache. His comment echoes the larger tension you've heard whispered everywhere. Nobody can settle on how many women actually worked these streets and houses. despite decades of counting. One ledger, stamped with the seal of the Registrar General, lists roughly 9,000 public women recorded by police in a given year during the mid-119th century. A mainstream fact seeps through those inked lines. Official reports tallied such figures to track social hygiene, yet left vast gaps. Since many worked part-time or under the cover of legitimate occupations, the clerk sighs and points to another paper, a printed speech from a parliamentarian, claiming the real number might exceed 50,000 in London alone. Historians still argue whether either estimate holds any weight, as both leaned heavily on shaky surveys and moral fervour, rather than careful data. You edge past the stand to where a young man chalks figures onto a blackboard outside a coffee house. His numbers climb by the hour, each total bolder than the last. When asked why, he shrugs and says the crowd tips him for every new record. Joke one surfaces when he claims he will write 100,000 next week just to see if the bishop faints while passing. His grin fades only when a stern patron warns him not to draw too much attention from the constables, who prefer scandal served in whispers, not chalk dust. Inside the coffee house, the air is a stew of pipe smoke, boiled chicory, and ink from fresh pamphlets. Two men at a corner table argue heatedly over whether London's so-called fallen women outnumber butchers or bakers, their voices rising like a pair of mismatched fiddles. One waves a penny paper claiming there's one such woman for every 30 men in the city, while the other thumps a church report insisting the figure is closer to 1 per 200. A quirky tidbit emerges when the owner interjects that his shop sells more of these scandal sheets than actual coffee, suggesting perhaps the numbers inflate as easily as his tills. In the back, a printer adjusts his handy press, its gears oiled and gleaming despite the soot that clings to everything. He explains that his broadsides feature conservative estimates, so as not to draw the wrath of reformers. Yet he secretly prints a second run with wilder figures, knowing the more outrageous totals sell twice as fast. Joke 2 flickers when he boasts that his printing press has 2 settings, truth and profitable, and only one keeps the ink flowing after midnight. Outside again, you follow a line of men heading toward a lecture hall where a placard announces, "An honest counter vice in our streets tonight only." The hall, a drafty former chapel, smells of beeswax and damp wall as attendees crowd onto benches. On the stage, a self-proclaimed statistician brandishes a thick notebook. He rattles off figures so swiftly the numbers blur together, comparing them to cab fares, bread loaves, and church tithes in a bid to make his point. Each new comparison draws murmurs, gasps, or skeptical chuckles from the audience. Historians still argue whether these public lectures aimed to enlighten, frighten, or simply entertain those eager for a thrill veiled as civic duty. Near the back row, 2 seamstresses whisper that the statistician's totals would empty half the factories if they were true. One rolls her eyes, saying she's counted her own colleagues and can vouch for none being lured off the factory floor, at least not before payday. A quirky habit unfolds as they reveal they make small bets on how high each lecturer's numbers will climb, exchanging buttons instead of coins so they can play without risking their scant wages. The talk crescendos with the speaker warning that London teeters on a moral precipice and declaring a new committee must audit every ward by week's end. His voice booms until a draft from the hall door blows out 2 of the stage candles. Joke 3 takes hold when someone mutters that even the candles can't stomach another tally, prompting a ripple of muffled laughter before the speaker slams his notebook shut in frustration. As the hall empties, the crowd disperses into fog that softens the gaslight to golden halos. The blackboard outside the coffee house still bears its inflated totals, now smudged by a curious hand. The clerk at the newsstand locks up his ledgers, shaking his head at numbers he suspects will never add up. The night absorbs the chatter of figures and warnings until only the faint scrape of chalk and the hiss of the lamps remain, leaving you with the sense that in London's alleys and drawing rooms alike, Certainty proves as slippery as the wet stones underfoot. The night hum swells as you drift toward Leicester Square, where flickering gaslight spills onto cobbles alive with voices, music, and the clatter of carriage wheels. A bright sign painted with curling letters advertises The Gilded Lyre, a music hall wedged between a tobacconist and a shuttered hat shop. Its doors swing open to release a burst of brass band notes, laughter, and the scent of beer so thick you could nearly chew it. The doorman, wearing a bowler hat polished to a shine, tips his head and waves you through, his grin wide enough to match the warm glow inside. The hall is a riot of noise and color. Red velvet curtains frame the stage, and polished mirrors along the walls multiply every flickering flame until it feels like a dozen chandeliers blaze overhead. Patrons crowd the floor, tankards in hand, their conversations threading between bursts of applause. A mainstream fact drifts beneath the melody. Victorian music halls were magnets for working-class entertainment, where audiences came as much for the cheap ale and camaraderie as for the songs, and where some women mingled to find clients under the cover of convivial chaos. On stage, a comic singer belts out a ditty about a lovesick chimney sweep, his exaggerated leaps and ashen face drawing hoots of laughter. Joke one rises when he finishes his verse with a wink and declares he'd marry his broom if only it could cook, a line that sends the front row into a chorus of whistles and stomps. Tankards clink, and a boy carrying a tray of pies weaves through the crowd, shouting, "Hot mutton tuppence," with the authority of a market crier. You step toward a quieter alcove where women in feathered bonnets and bright shawls lean against the paneled walls, their fans flicking open and shut in a rhythm that seems almost like code. One offers a smile to a sailor nursing his pint, and turns her attention back to a table of clerks arguing over a game of cribbage. A quirky tidbit emerges when one woman reveals that the flicking fan signals prices and willingness without speaking over the music. A single tap for a short meeting, 2 for a walk to a nearby lodging, 3 for a more generous arrangement. The fans flutter like tiny semaphore flags beneath the glow of oil lamps. The music shifts as a dancer spins onto the stage, her skirts swirling in wide arcs that flash glimpses of striped stockings and lace garters. The audience roars approval, coins rattling onto the stage boards, though some roll into the orchestra pit where the pianist scoops them up with a grin. Historians still argue whether music halls acted as recruitment grounds or simply as safe meeting places for deals already arranged. But the line between entertainment and enterprise feels hazy in this heat. Near the back, 2 impresarios whisper by the bar, their heads bent over a ledger thick with smudged pencil marks. They discuss which acts will pull the largest crowds, and whether adding more dancers will keep patrons drinking longer. Joke 2 bubbles when one admits he books the comic singer, mostly because his off-key choruses encourage more ale sales. As no one can endure those notes sober, you follow the swell of voices to a balcony overlooking the stage. From here, the crowd below looks like a restless tide, hats bobbing and tankards raised like buoys. In the balcony's shadow, a pair of performers sip watered wine, discussing which patrons tip most reliably. One of them explains that many women strike deals not in the noisy hall but in the quieter corridors beyond, where a whisper is easier to hear than a bawdy verse. A quirky detail emerges when she mentions that some music halls kept locked side rooms, officially labeled as private rehearsal spaces, though few ever heard a single note of practice from inside. Back downstairs, the band strikes a march, the brassy notes bouncing off the mirrored walls. The hall's air grows warmer, heavy with the smells of ale, tobacco, and mutton pies. A young boy clears tables with the speed of a pickpocket, palming stray coins and crumbs alike, a blur in the dim glow. Joke 3 slips in when a regular at the bar mutters that the boy will one day own the hall, since he already collects the profits 1 penny at a time. As the clock above the stage strikes 11, the show reaches its crescendo, a chorus line of dancers high-u kicking in unison. As the band blares a triumphant finale, the audience erupts in cheers, feet stomping so hard the floor trembles like a restless ship deck. When the final note fades, the patrons pour into the foggy streets, voices still raised, laughter spilling into the night air. Some head for nearby taverns, others towards shadowed alleys and waiting cabs, the music hall's energy rippling outward long after its doors close. The square grows quieter as the crowd disperses, the gaslight dimming to gentle halos along the cobblestones. You linger at the edge of the street, hearing faint echoes of the comic's broom song carried on the breeze, mingled with the clatter of hooves, and the far-off call of a watchman marking the hour. The night feels both emptied and alive, as if the echoes of laughter and whispered bargains hover in the fog, waiting to be replayed when the gilded lyre lights up again tomorrow. A brittle wind snakes through narrow lanes near Aldgate as you follow the wavering glow of gas lamps that seem too small for the darkness around them. The air carries a hint of coal smoke, mixed with a sharper tang of fear, a tension that prickles your skin as whispers ripple from shadow to shadow. Someone mutters the name Jack, another spits over their shoulder for luck, and the mood of the street seems to tighten like a cord pulled taut. The lamps throw long, nervous shadows, and every clatter of hoof or boot feels like a prelude to something unseen. Along Dorset Street, women huddle close to brick walls, their shawls drawn high, eyes flicking to every moving figure. A mainstream fact lingers heavy here. In the autumn of 1888, the Whitechapel murders shocked London, and the name Jack the Ripper seeped into every whispered conversation, his crimes casting a lasting chill over neighborhoods already frayed by poverty and suspicion. Patrols doubled, curfews whispered, yet the fog still swallowed figures whole, leaving the alleys feeling like they belonged to no one. At the corner, a newsboy hawks a fresh broadside adorned with gruesome sketches of the latest victim, his voice hoarse as he shouts about terrible deeds in the East End. Joke one slips grimly when a bystander, voice rough from gin, mutters that the artist spends more ink on blood than on spelling, a comment that draws a weak chuckle from the crowd. Despite the morbid subject, the papers sell out quickly, coins clinking as onlookers snatch their copies, some folding them tight, others clutching them openly like badges of dread. You drift down a side alley where a solitary constable's boots click against the cobbles in slow, deliberate steps. His lantern throws a narrow cone of light, catching the glint of frost along the gutter. He pauses to scratch a note in his pocket ledger, eyes scanning the shadows. Historians still argue whether the police genuinely worked to protect women during this panic, or merely sought to reassure the public, as many arrests in these nights targeted the very women most at risk for vagrancy or loitering, rather than offering safety. Farther along, a baker's shutter creaks open just wide enough for a woman to pass through, clutching a cloth-wrapped loaf. She whispers that she trades day-old bread for keeping watch at the alley's mouth, serving as an unofficial lookout for others working nearby. A quirky tidbit emerges when she explains that some women wore bells sewn discreetly into their skirts not to attract clients, but to jingle softly as warnings if a stranger's steps followed too close. A faint tinkling tonight sounds more like nerves than music. The group gathers near a butcher's stall, its hooks bare for the night, to trade scraps of rumor. One man swears he saw a figure in a dark cape vanish into Mitre Square moments before a scream. Another insists the killer must be a doctor because of the clean cuts, while his companion claims it's clearly a foreign sailor. The arguments rise and fall like waves, each voice tinged with fear and fascination. Joke too catches on when a bystander quips that half the city's barbers could fit the clean cut theory, prompting a brief burst of laughter that feels almost illicit in the heavy air. From deeper in the district comes the distant wail of a whistle, sharp and urgent, followed by the pounding of hurried boots. Doors slam, shutters rattle, and figures scatter like startled birds into doorways and side streets. The tension swells so thick you could trace it with a fingertip. Even the horses tied along the street stamp and snort, their ears twitching at every echo. You turn a corner and nearly collide with a man in a tall bowler, who clutches a folded handbill. He mutters about a vigilante group forming at the 10 Bells pub, men determined to patrol the streets themselves, armed with cudgels and lanterns. Some in the city see them as protectors, others as reckless amateurs, stirring more chaos than calm. A mainstream fact cuts through the fog here. Citizen patrols indeed sprang up during the Ripper Scare, often clashing with police and fueling a debate about whether they helped or hindered the investigation. At the edge of Miller's Court, a pale-faced woman peers from behind a shutter, her candlelight casting a trembling glow on her cheek. She whispers to someone unseen that she'll avoid working until daylight, even if it means no coin for food. The fear, heavy as the frost, is enough to drive some from the streets entirely, their already thin livelihoods fraying further. A quirky custom surfaces as a man passing by tosses her a sprig of rosemary, saying it wards off evil. She tucks it into her bodice, with a small nod, whether for luck or comfort, no one can tell. Joke 3 flickers faintly when a cabman, pulling his horse to a stop, remarks to his passenger that the fog itself is the true villain, since it hides every boot, blade, and bad haircut London can produce. His dry tone draws a reluctant chuckle from 2 eavesdroppers, though their eyes keep sweeping the shadows. The church bell at Spitalfields tolls midnight, its sound rolling through the mist like a warning rather than a blessing. The streets feel taut, as if the fog itself is listening. You step carefully past shuttered windows and gas lamps dimmed by grime, the cold settling into your coat as every creak and echo seems to carry weight. The whispers of fear, rumour, and survival wind through the alleys, and the night feels unwilling to release its grip until the first grey light of morning peels the shadows away. A pale sliver of moon rides between drifting clouds as you cross Blackfriars Bridge, the wind snapping at your coat and lifting the faint smell of the river into your nose. On the far bank, a wooden jetty creaks underfoot, its planks slick with mist and algae. The faint glow of a lantern marks the entrance to a floating shelter, a barge moored just off the quay, converted by a benevolent society into a place for the homeless to sleep. A painted sign sways gently from its mast, haven for the night, free to the deserving. Inside, the air smells of wet wool, boiled cabbage, and river damp, a stew of scents that settles in your clothes within minutes. Rough wooden bunks line the hold, stacked 3 high, each layered with a blanket coarse enough to scratch. A volunteer in a wool waistcoat checks names in a ledger, asking for each person's occupation before they're given a space. A mainstream fact slips in as you watch the process. Victorian shelters often divided the deserving poor, those willing to work or attend religious services, from the undeserving, who were turned back into the fog. A distinction rooted less in need than in morality, as judged by their benefactors. A boy no older than 15 shuffles past, clutching a tin mug filled with barley broth. He mutters to no one in particular that the broth tastes like floorboard tea, drawing a snicker from a woman seated nearby. Joke 1 stirs as she whispers that at least the broth comes warm, unlike the river, which charges a colder fee for its embrace. The laugh ripples down the row, though it dies quickly when the volunteer clears his throat. At the far end, a makeshift chapel has been set up on deck, its walls nothing more than canvas tarps hung to block the wind. A preacher stands beside a cracked harmonium, urging the gathered to bow their heads as he reads a passage about redemption. His voice trembles slightly when the boat rocks, and you can hear coins clinking into a donation tin each time he pauses. Historians still argue whether these nightly sermons were genuine attempts to comfort or simply a condition of entry, as some shelters required attendance before food or bedding was offered. Beyond the canvas, another group huddles near the galley, where a pot of weak tea simmers. They whisper about which docks might offer work come morning, which market stalls need cleaning, and which parish kitchens are most generous with their bread rations. A quirky tidbit comes when one man explains that some shelters secretly marked good workers with chalk on their boots, a signal to potential employers who prowled the quay at dawn looking for cheap labour. the chalk often smudged away in puddles, turning the whole system into an odd lottery. A gust of wind rattles the lanterns along the gangway as a new arrival steps aboard, dripping rainwater from his hat brim. He trades a bundle of old newspapers for a space on a bunk, the volunteer accepting them with a nod. Apparently the barge uses the papers to patch leaks along the hull, stuffing them into cracks before sealing them with tar. Joke too lingers when another guest mutters that the headlines finally serve a purpose beyond scaring readers, earning a muffled laugh from those already burrowed in their blankets. Outside on the deck, the river slaps against the barge in slow, steady rhythms. A pair of women sit cross-legged near the rail, staring at the city lights trembling across the water. One murmurs that she prefers the barge to the workhouse because at least here, the sky feels close enough to touch. The other traces shapes in the condensation on the railing, drawing a crude star before wiping it away. The faint smell of tar and lantern oil mixes with the colder scent of the tide, the combination oddly soothing after the close air inside. A watchman in a heavy cloak patrols the deck, his boots thudding softly on the planks. He pauses to speak with you, explaining that the society behind the shelter funds it partly through charitable teas and penny lectures back in the city, events where polite crowds sip spiced punch while discussing solutions for the poor they'll never meet. Historians still argue whether such philanthropy offered genuine relief or served mainly as salve for wealthy consciences, but here on the rocking deck, those arguments feel distant as the wind hums between the tarps. Inside once more, the bunks creak as the last guests settle. The harmonium's final notes drift into the hold, blending with the low murmur of conversation and the faint splash of the river against the hull. Joke 3 surfaces softly when a thin man near the galley says he hopes the barge doesn't sink tonight, since I'm not keen on becoming a saint just to keep warm. A few heads lift and chuckle, the sound gentle enough to avoid the volunteers' glare. The lanterns dim as the watchman trims their wicks, leaving only a few weak halos glowing along the hold. Outside, the city's roar is softened by the steady slap of water, as if the river itself is a blanket drawn over the night's unrest. You step onto the gangway, feeling the gentle sway beneath your boots as the fog thickens over the Thames, blurring the opposite bank into a dreamlike shadow. The shelter rocks, the tide murmurs, and the lights of London blink faintly in the distance as you make your way back to the stone steps, your breath clouding in the cold air. A dim lamplight flickers outside the infirmary of St. Giles, its glass chimney streaked with soot so thick it turns the glow from gold to bruised orange. You slip down a narrow hallway, lined with chipped blue tiles, each tile stamped with a number meant to keep track of repairs that never came. Beyond a warped door, straw pallets sprawl across the floor, occupied by figures bundled in grey blankets that rise and fall like tired bellows. Coughs echo in uneven rhythm, punctuated by the clink of a tin spoon stirring willow wilbark tonic in a chipped mug. A nurse in a threadbare serge dress moves from pallet to pallet, her lamp casting wandering moons across faces drawn tight by fever. A small brass bell dangles at her waist. It chimes whenever she bends, not to summon help but to remind the patients she is coming, so they muster enough strength to turn their heads. You kneel beside one pallet where a woman clutches a cloth doll with the fervour of a lifeline. She tells you the doll belonged to a child she once nursed, though she cannot recall the child's name, only a nursery rhyme about silver buttons. The tonic she sips leaves a dark ring around her lips, an unintended moustache that she wipes away with the doll's calico skirt. Joke 1 flutters when she quips that the tonic tastes like burnt bootstraps dipped in sugar, but at least it costs less than tea. Her laugh curls into a rasp, and she closes her eyes, the doll now resting on her chest like a sentinel, no bigger than a sparrow. Toward the rear of the room, a doctor consults a registry bound in cracked leather. Each entry lists a brief description, hair color, approximate height, distinguishing marks because names often fade faster than fevers. A mainstream fact weighs heavy here. Municipal infirmaries in late Victorian London recorded thousands of patients, under the catch-all label, unknown female, sending them to parish burial grounds when no relatives stepped forward within 48 hours. The doctor dips his pen and scribbles a note beside the pallet nearest you, sighing at the stain spreading beneath the ink. He remarks that pauper coffins arrive every Thursday at dawn. If the cart fills early, bodies wait until the following week, stored in a cool alcove behind the furnace. An irony that would be funnier if not so bleak. You step outside for a breath of air that tastes only marginally cleaner than the fumes inside. Lamplighters shuffle past, their ladders clattering against the pavement. A carriage thunders by, splashing dirty water across your boots. From a nearby courtyard comes the metallic thud of a constable's truncheon rapping on a door, followed by a shout and a scuffle. You turn to see two officers march a man toward the station, his coat flapping open to reveal a bloody spattered waistcoat. A woman trails behind, sobbing that he refused to pay, her voice cracking like brittle china. Historians still argue whether police arrested more clients or women during such altercations, statistics muddied by missing paperwork and a reluctance to charge men of influence. Down a quieter lane, faint music drifts from an upstairs window, a violin playing a lullaby that hovers just shy of sweet. You climb rickety stairs and find a dim room where a slender man tips his hat in greeting, pausing his bow mid-rephrase. He says he lodges here by the week and plays evenings to pay the rent, though the landlady accepts vegetables in tight months. On a table lies a ledger filled with crossed-out names, lodgers, who vanished without settling their bill. A quirky tidbit surfaces as he explains that landladies sometimes keep a ghost page, where they note stories about vanished tenants, convincing future guests to pay promptly lest they join the invisible company. He returns to his violin, the melody drifting down the stairs to blend with a cat's yowl in the alley. Out on the street, a funeral cart rumbles by, its driver clucking at a horse whose ribs show even through the gloom. The cart is stacked with plain pine coffins, stained by damp. Two children dart behind, hoping to snag dropped nails for resale. They treat the cart like a parade float, though no one cheers. Joke 2 arises when the driver calls back that if the children want souvenirs, they should wait for the next load. It usually comes with finer hardware. The children scamper off, giggling at the macabre tip. You follow the cart to a low stone chapel, perched on the edge of a graveyard where crooked headstones lean like weary diners at the world's saddest banquet. A sexton pulls a soggy ledger from under his coat, logging each coffin with a stub of pencil. He glances at the names or blank spaces, shrugs, and marks the plot numbers. A mainstream detail surfaces. Public cemeteries routinely layered pauper coffins 3 deep, renting the upper soil for fresh burials once the topmost lid collapsed into dust. A grim real estate cycle hidden beneath ornamental yew trees. Rain begins, soft as a sigh. The sexton wraps his scarf tighter and remarks that the weather saves him from watering the grass. Joke 3 drips in when he adds that even the dead appreciate a good wash, though they never send thanks. He slides the ledger back into his coat, the pages already feathered with damp. Leaving the graveyard, you pass a stone wall where someone chalked a single word, gone. No name, no date, just a farewell hanging in the drizzle. A newspaper scrap flutters against the wall, headlines smudged beyond reading. You peel it free, noticing a patch sewn from a dress hem, someone's makeshift umbrella perhaps, and tuck it into your pocket as the wind picks up. You walk on, boots splashing through shallow puddles reflecting the dim gaslight. The city feels hollowed, as if each shadow might contain a life once bright, now extinguished without witness. Yet somewhere a tavern door slams. Laughter bursts, and the violinist's lullaby drifts faintly through cracked shutters. Life and loss laced together in the fog. A tapestry as ragged as the hems brushing your ankles. Mist drifts like loose silk across the rooftops while you leave the main roads behind and slip into a small square lined with weather-worn statues. Each stone figure once stood over a fountain, but the pipes cracked long ago, and now only pigeons drink from rainwater pooled in chipped basins. You pause beneath a lamppost that flickers as if deciding whether to stay awake or join the statues in sleep. The square feels hushed, yet it hums with undercurrents of stories too shy to speak above a whisper. If you lean close to the marble, the chill against your ear nearly suggests a heartbeat, though that might just be your own pulse keeping time in this midnight museum. A bronze plaque at the base of one statue proclaims it a tribute to industry and morality, erected after a civic campaign that promised light and order to every corner of the city. A mainstream fact tucks itself into the quiet. Victorian philanthropists often financed public monuments to morality, confident that stone sermons would uplift passers-by better than any leaflet. Yet moss creeps over the pious inscription, and a spider has turned the O in morality into a private doorway, perfectly happy to ignore lofty intentions. Nearby, a street sweeper in wool mittens puffs clouds of breath as he nudges a broom along frost-trimmed cobbles. He jokes that the statues judge his sweeping form, then admits he prefers their silence to the cluck of living critics. Joke 1 lands lightly when he confides that pigeons, unlike patrons, never file complaints, though they do leave pointed feedback from above. He tips his cap and moves on, leaving faint tracks on the damp stones that vanish as quickly as they appear. To one side of the square sits a tiny bookstall, its shutters propped open, though the hour has grown skeptical of buyers. A wizened vendor pours steaming chicory into a cracked mug and invites you to browse his oddments, mostly pamphlets, faded engravings, and dog-eared prayer cards. He waves toward a stack labeled Lives of the Unrecorded, an anthology of brief newspaper obituaries collected over 20 years. A quirky tidbit emerges when he explains he pastes each clipping into a ledger and scribbles imagined biographies in the margins, because somebody ought to finish the sentences the printers began. You leaf through pages where anonymous seamstress, age unknown, becomes secret watercolorist of rooftop sunsets, her life expanded by ink and empathy. Across the way, a lamplighter leans against his ladder, watching you with a lantern balanced on one knee. He remarks that no two nights here are exactly alike, yet most mornings leave him with the same soot under his nails. Historians still argue whether lamplighters saw more of the city's hidden life than constables ever did, but he shrugs at grand theories and focuses on trimming wicks so the flames burn steady until dawn. Joke 2 flickers when he adds that a lamp's memory is as short as its candle power, bright for an hour, then gone. No gossip kept. You trace a circle around the square, boots tapping gentle echoes between shuttered townhouses. A faint melodic hum rises from an open attic window. Someone picks out lullabies on a penny whistle, each note floating down like soft petals that never quite touch the ground. No audience applauds, yet the tune persists, stitched into the night, as surely as the frost on iron railings. The melody feels familiar even if you cannot name it. A reminder that anonymity sometimes hides gentle artistry. On a low stone bench sits an elderly woman wrapping newspapers around her ankles for warmth. She beckons you closer and points to the statues, insisting the marble cheeks blush under moonlight whenever the whistle hits a perfect note. Joke 3 settles when she claims the blush vanished last Tuesday after the musician tried a poker, but the statues hate poker, dearie. You share a quiet laugh that steams into the cold air before drifting apart like two sleepy balloons. She offers one of her newspapers, dated a decade back, the headline proclaiming new moral ordinances slated to banish vice by Easter. The ledger in your mind recalls how vice slipped back in before Pentecost, wearing a slightly different bonnet. A mainstream detail surfaces. Municipal crackdowns, cyclically promised to cleanse districts within months, yet archival crime tallies rarely dipped for long, proving reform letters travelled faster than reform realities. You glance again at the silent statues, their scrolls and torches chipped, their marble feet dusted with breadcrumbs from the pigeon parliament, the bookstall vendor's ledger, the lamplighter's shrug, the sweeper's broom. They all vibrate with the same unspoken lesson. Numbers fade, edicts crumble, but impressions linger in corners too quiet for headlines. Somewhere, ledger totals will conflict forever, and patrols will still argue over chalk lines. Yet here, the hush sways like a lullaby made visible. The woman settles her shoulders, closing eyes that have watched more midnights than church bells can count. You tuck your hands deeper into your coat pockets, feeling the cold through the seams, and understand that not every story needs a plaque or a headline to matter. Some echo softly, polishing the corners of a square no guidebook lists, imprinting stone, soot, and moonlight with a resonance strong enough to outlast the clamor. The square dims as the moon slips behind a gauze of passing cloud, softening every edge until statues blur into gentle shapes and lamplight thins to a sleepy glow. Your heartbeat eases, matching the slow sweep of the river you can almost hear in the distance, its steady hush coaxing the city into quieter dreams. Breathe in, feel cool night air, fill your lungs with a pale whisper of coal smoke and winter mint. Then exhale any lingering tension, letting it drift upward like faint chimney steam. Imagine each cobblestone beneath your feet warming just enough to cradle your steps, guiding you across the square toward a doorway of quiet comfort. The pigeons have tucked heads beneath wings, the lamplighter's ladder rests upon a wall, and even the tireless sweep leans on his broom, eyelids drooping. A final note from the attic whistle hovers, then fades into stillness, leaving only the soft rustle of ivy across stone. An unhurried lullaby that knows precisely when to let silence speak. Your shoulders drop, weight loosening like buttons slipping free, and thoughts settle into slower rhythms, as if time itself stretches into long, unbroken threads. Each breath now slides deeper, carrying calm to fingertips, to toes, to the hidden spaces behind your eyes. Let images of marble softened by moonlight, the gentle flutter of fans, and the hush of mist over the Thames weave themselves into a comforting quilt, wrapping you in stories without need for words. Allow the night to close around you like heavy velvet curtains, moth-wing soft, while the city exhales a final sigh. Nothing more is required, nothing more to follow. Only rest, drifting on quiet echoes until morning's first grey light nudges the mist aside. Sleep well, traveller, cradled by the hush of streets that now belong entirely to dreams.